Chapter 158. The entire world was in an uproar. The death of Muramasa Haoyue completely caused the diplomatic relationship between Japan and Xia to drop to a freezing point. Japan even sent their foreign affairs minister to ask Xia for the Muramasa demon blade. Unfortunately, Xia's officials were very strong. They directly told the Japanese that the Muramasa demon blade was Yi Xian's spoils of war. Xia had no right to ask Yi Xian to return it to Japan. For a moment, the smoke of war slowly rose between the countries. It seemed like a war would break out if there was a disagreement. However, at this critical moment when the exotic beasts were wreaking havoc all over the world, this war also disappeared without a trace. Yi Xian, a simple name, was known by the entire world. He was even crowned as the #1 expert of the East. He was vaguely at odds with the Golden Paladin of the Vatican City in the West. Although Muramasa Haoyue didn't die at the hands of Yi Xian, just one of Yi Xian's servants had taken his life. This also caused Yi Xian's reputation to reach its peak. But this wasn't the end. When Yi Xian was crowned as the #1 expert of the East, explosive news spread all over the world. It completely caused an uproar among the forces of the world. They even sent messengers to Xia. Wuxia. A domineering name. When this name appeared in the ears of the world, ordinary people were puzzled. They didn't know who it was. However, whether it was the East or the West, when some ancient forces heard the name Wuxia, their hearts trembled. That was because it was this name that had caused a huge commotion 100 years ago. There was no path in heaven and earth, only Wuxia. He didn't respect Buddhism and only cultivated himself. With Tongtian's martial strength, he swept through the entire divine continent. There was no one who could withstand his attacks. He trampled Dongying, defeated Goryeo, and went to the west. Along the way, many experts in the west fell at his feet. It was only when the previous Pope of the Vatican walked out of the Holy Palace that the two of them engaged in a shocking battle. This battle was chaotic. No one knew the final outcome. It was also in this battle that the two top experts in the world disappeared one after another, leaving behind a legend that the world yearned for. Wuxia was the #1 fighter of the East, and he had the reputation of being the #1 man in the world. If it were not for the fact that no one knew the outcome of the battle 100 years ago, Wuxia would have become the #1 man in the world. Ancient martial artists came to court, mutants came to pay their respects, Jixia Academy, Small Thunder Temple, the ancient clans of the East and West, the emissaries of the Vatican, the Western Witchcraft Alliance, all the major powers in the world rushed towards the Xia kingdom because Wuxia was a legend of his era, and no one had ever broken this legend. He stood at the peak and was invincible. Because Wuxia was still alive, who would dare to call themselves the #1 expert of the East? Yi Lingtian issued a challenge to Yi Xian through a global broadcast. If Yi Xian wanted the title of the top fighter of the East, he would have to fight his brother, Wuxia, first. If he could win, the title of top fighter of the East would be given to him. The whole world was in an uproar. However, Jiangnan City was extremely quiet. Yi Xian did not respond to the challenge at all. This made Yi Lingtian feel as if he had punched cotton. It gave him a feeling of powerlessness, which made him feel extremely unsatisfied. Yi Xian did not accept the challenge. This was understandable in the eyes of the world, because Wuxia was a legend. No matter how strong Yi Xian was, how could he be a match for Wuxia? Just as this matter was about to settle down, Fatso Huang released a statement through Jiangnan TV, which completely focused the world's attention on him. In this world, there is no one who can make my master challenge, but if anyone wants to challenge my master, they can pay him a visit in person. When this statement was released, the whole world was in an uproar. Obviously, this statement was too arrogant. It actually made Wuxia pay him a visit in person. How could they take Wuxia seriously? Capital City. Yi Lingtian's face was gloomy. He stared at Fatso Huang on the TV. Wu Juexian, on the other hand, was wearing a black shirt. His face was expressionless, as if he was not affected by anything. Brother Juexian, I'll have to trouble you to accompany me to Jiangnan, Yi Lingtian looked back and said unwillingly. Yi Lingtian, after this battle, you and I will cut off all ties, Wu Juexian said softly. When he took a step forward, he disappeared in front of Yi Lingtian. Looking at Wu Juexian's back, Yi Lingtian's face flushed red. He murmured, Yi Xian, no matter how strong you are, in front of Wu Juexian, you will know the meaning of despair. A piece of news spread around the world. Wu Juexian had personally gone to Jiangnan to fight Yi Xian. This battle was the first time Wu Juexian had fought in 100 years. The entire Jiangnan city was packed with people, all of whom wanted to witness this battle of the century. Wu Juexian was invincible in the world 100 years ago. He even dared to say that there was no road between heaven and earth, only he was Wu Juexian. Yi Xian was mysterious and unpredictable. No one knew what kind of cultivation he had inherited. In the eyes of the world, he had never been defeated. Both of them were legendary geniuses. This was a battle that spanned 100 years. It was a battle of the century. Who was the strongest in the East would be decided in this battle. Qingyun Pavilion. Yi Xian leaned lazily on the soft sofa. Zhuo Junting pressed her hands on Yi Xian's shoulders. Her skillful massage made Yi Xian very satisfied. Sir, are you really going to fight Wu Juexian? Fatso Huang asked in a low voice. Wu Juexian. I've read about him in the ancient files of the Wu An agency. He is indeed a genius that only appears once in 1,000 years. I hope he won't disappoint me. After all, the world is about to fall. If humans are always so weak, wouldn't it be too boring? Yi Xian said softly. Sir, your cultivation is unprecedented. How can a mere Wu Juexian be your opponent? Fatso Huang said respectfully. Hearing Fatso Huang's words, Yi Xian's face was calm. His eyes were deep as he said, Fatso Huang, you must always remember that this world does not lack geniuses. In every era, there are always a few people who are admired by the world. For Wu Juexian to be so respected by the world, he must have his own strengths. As Yi Xian said this, he got up from the sofa. His eyes were as deep as an ancient pool. He looked into the distant sky and said, I just received an opportunity, and my level of life has surpassed that of mortals. However, I still believe that on the path of cultivation, I must tread on thin ice. I must not underestimate anyone. Only then can I take one step at a time and reach the top of the 9 heavens. On the 7th day of the 7th month, the sun shone brightly in the sky. A black figure strolled through the air towards the azure cloud courtyard. With each step he took, the surrounding space rumbled as if the world was twisting. It made people feel extremely pressured just by looking at him. Wu Juexian stood proudly in the void, looking down at the azure cloud villa. His face was very calm, so calm that there was not the slightest ripple. His voice was old and hoarse. I originally did not want to be tainted by the world of mortals. However, I owed someone in the past. Today, I have come here to fight with you. It can be considered as repaying the karma of the past. Brother, please grant me my wish. Wu Juexian did not take advantage of his seniority, nor did he have the bearing of a senior. He spoke as if they were of the same generation because his heart was not here. He did not care about how the world looked at him. He only wanted to leave the world after this battle. Chapter 159. There was a sea of people, but it was silent. Whether it was the envoys of the world's major forces or the TV reporters who were broadcasting this battle of the century, they were all silent at this moment. They looked at Wu Juexian from the ground. Everyone's breathing was heavy, and their eyes were filled with deep reverence. When a person reached the peak, he did not need to put on airs or speak big words. He simply stood high in the sky, as if he was the only one in the world. A millennium talent, unparalleled and unparalleled. Wu Juexian was the brightest star of an era. Inside the azure cloud pavilion, Fatso Huang's face was gloomy. He directly gave the three team leaders of the underworld a look. Obviously, the arrival of Wu Juexian made Fatso Huang want to join forces with the three team leaders to attack Wu Juexian together. Stand down. You are not his match. Suddenly, Yi Xian's face was calm, but his eyes were shining. It was a strange light, as if he had discovered something extremely new. Dong! Yi Xian took a step forward and suddenly disappeared from the azure cloud pavilion. When he reappeared, he was already high in the sky, facing Wu Juexian. Yi Xian has come out. This is a true battle of the century. It is enough to be recorded in the history of mankind. Let's wait and see who is the top expert of the East. A large number of discussions could be heard from the crowd on the ground. Everyone was watching with rapt attention, not daring to be distracted in the slightest. They wanted to witness this unprecedented battle. High in the sky, in the void, Yi Xian placed his hands behind his back as a cool breeze blew over, causing his jet-black hair to flutter in the wind. There was not the slightest bit of aura around him, and the gaze he used to look at Wu Juexian was extremely calm. Wu Juexian stood in the void, carefully sizing up this junior. A smile appeared on his face. You are very strong. You are not bad either. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Everything was said without words, and there was a faint feeling of appreciation. In fact, the two of them were very similar. They were the same kind of people. They did not respect the heavens and the earth and only cultivated themselves. They believed that their fate was in their own hands and not the heavens. The world has changed, and time has changed. I thought that I was invincible in my generation. I thought that I was invincible. But now that I've met Brother Yi, I realize that there is someone like Brother Yi in this world. Even if Wu Juexian were to die here today, I would have no regrets in my life, Wu Juexian said with a smile. At the end of the world, spiritual energy no longer exists. Brother Wu was able to rely on himself to break through the limits of ancient martial arts and walk a path that no one before him has walked. This Yi is extremely impressed. Yi Xian slowly nodded. His eyes were filled with admiration, and his voice was extremely sincere. Although the two did not reveal any of their auras, they could sense that the other had taken a path that no one had taken before. The only difference was that Wu Juexian viewed Yi Xian as his greatest enemy. He could not see through Yi Xian's cultivation, and Yi Xian gave him an even greater sense of pressure. Wu Juexian had never felt such a feeling in his life, but it made his originally calm blood boil. Brother Yi, can we fight in the sky? Wu Juexian waved his sleeves, causing the wind to blow. His voice reverberated in all directions. Please. Yi Xian smiled casually. When he took a step forward, his entire body soared into the sky. Boom boom boom. The clouds surged, and the wind howled. Wu Juexian turned into a ray of light and chased after Yi Xian. The two of them disappeared from the eyes of the world. This. Quick, activate the satellite tracking system and find out where the two of them went. All sorts of noises could be heard from the crowd. All the satellites in the world were activated, and in a few breaths, the two of them appeared clearly again. Above the sky, in the void, Wu Juexian's body was glowing. This was the light of martial arts. It was as if it could pierce through the heavens and the earth. His clothes were flapping, and his black hair danced in the wind. I have a fist that can split mountains, overturn seas, and overturn the sky. This fist is called heaven-breaking. Brother Yi, please teach me. Wu Juexian swung his fists, stirring up the endless wind and clouds. The heavens and earth rumbled, and even the void around him was distorted. It was a terrifying sight. God illuminates the sun and moon to set the universe. Demons create chaos in the sea and turn it into mulberry fields. I have a fist that is called the Great Demon. Buzz. Tongtian's black light seemed to have penetrated the past and present. Endless sounds of slaughter rang out in all directions, and the sound of demons dancing could be heard. When Yi Xian swung his fists, the demonic light that pierced through the sky bloomed on his fists. Fight! Kill! Like a meteor streaking across the sky, the void collapsed under the two's earth-shattering roars. Endless fists blasted out violently, like a meteor shower streaking across the sky. Bang bang bang! The sky shook, and the void exploded. Endless wind and clouds turned into water vapor. A great battle of the century had begun, and the two of them attacked each other violently. Sky Splitter Blade. Wu Juexian turned his palm into a blade, and a 1,000-foot-long blade light cut across the sky, but Yi Xian dodged it. However, the 1,000-foot-long blade light fell and turned a mountain into dust. Sword, come! Clang clang clang. Sword chi buzzed incessantly. Yi Xian turned his finger into a sword, and a 1,000-foot-long blade light condensed in the void and slashed violently toward Wu Juexian. However, Wu Juexian perfectly dodged it. However, the 1,000-foot-long blade light cut 100 miles of land in half. Its terrifying power was simply unimaginable. Through the satellite broadcast, everyone in the world watched this great battle of the century. When they saw the terrifying power released by the two of them, everyone's faces were filled with fear. Is this really a power that a human can have? Scary, too scary. I'm afraid that the so-called intercontinental missiles can't hurt them, right? Could they be immortals? Everyone in the world was shocked because the scene created by the two of them was too terrifying. This was not a power that a human should have. The battle in the sky continued for 3 days and 3 nights. During this time, the two of them killed each other, and there was no clear winner. This made the battle even more intense. Bang! Suddenly, the void exploded, and the air blasted out in all directions. The two of them attacked each other again. Wu Juexian's breathing became difficult, and he looked at Yi Xian with a strange gaze. His whole body was trembling. Why? Why are you hiding your cultivation? Wu Juexian roared violently. The terrifying martial arts light shrouded him, and his voice was so loud that it could shatter mountains and rivers. He was angrily questioning Yi Xian. Wu Juexian was a genius that only appeared once in 1,000 years. He had even walked his own path of martial arts. Even the end of the world could not stop him from yearning for the path of immortality. However, it was such a person who was angrily roaring at Yi Xian. After 3 days and 3 nights of battle, Wu Juexian finally realized something that made him extremely angry. That was, Yi Xian had not revealed his true strength at all. This was because no matter how he attacked Yi Xian, he did not cause any damage to Yi Xian. On the other hand, every time Yi Xian attacked him, it was obvious that it was an understatement, and even caused him to suffer heavy injuries. He was afraid that he would be defeated by Yi Xian in a few days. Wu Juexian could accept being defeated, but Yi Xian had hidden his strength. This made him feel extremely humiliated. An uncontrollable anger exploded at this moment. Chapter 160. Looking at Wu Juexian's angry face, Yi Xian stood in the sky. His expression was calm as he said, "Wu Juexian, I have to say that you are the first person I admire. In this world, only you are worthy of fighting me. You were able to break through the limits of martial arts and walk your own path. If you were in the era of spiritual qi, you would be a Tongtian hero. However, in this world, there is no spiritual qi. Even if you don't believe in fate, it has limited your path. If I were to reveal my cultivation, it would be an unfair victory. I, Yi Xian, would not do such a thing." When the conversation between the two was heard, the entire world was deathly silent. Although they didn't understand the meaning behind their words, they clearly knew one thing, and that was that Yi Xian hadn't revealed his full strength. I see, Wu Juexian murmured. After 10 breaths of time, a smile appeared on his face. He then looked at Yi Xian and said, Brother Yi Xian, so you have been sealing your cultivation all this time to fight me fairly. Wu Juexian then roared, but I, Wu Juexian, do not want this kind of fairness. Even if I lose to you today, I ask you to fight me with dignity. Yi Xian was slightly stunned as he looked at the powerful battle intent around Wu Juexian. A trace of depth flashed through his eyes as he looked at Wu Juexian. In fact, Yi Xian could have killed him with one move. However, Yi Xian did not want to do so. Wu Juexian was suppressed by the world. To be able to reach this step was already amazing to Yi Xian. Yi Xian asked himself. If he had not obtained the immortal scripture and spent 4 years in the Blood Sea battlefield, he might not have been Wu Juexian's opponent. This was why Yi Xian had not used his cultivation to defeat him. Yi Xian knew that he could be cruel and ruthless, and he could do anything to achieve his goals. However, this sort of unfair victory was something that Yi Xian's pride would not allow. He wanted to give Wu Juexian a fair fight. Brother Yi, please give it your all. Even if Wu Juexian dies, he will be able to rest in peace. All of a sudden. On the global satellite television broadcast, Wu Juexian bowed to Yi Xian in the air, pleading for Yi Xian to attack with all his might. This was his last shred of dignity. It was also this scene that caused Yi Lingtian, who was lying on the ground, to stare blankly. He knelt on the ground powerlessly, and large amounts of tears flowed out of his eyes. Brother Juexian, I've let you down. At that moment, Yi Lingtian's face was filled with guilt. He was unwilling to be trampled under the feet of the younger generation. He had even forced Wu Juexian to step into the mortal world, but this was the result he had received. If there was one person in the world who understood Wu Juexian the best, other than his own sister, it would be Yi Lingtian. Yi Lingtian had never thought that a proud and unyielding man like Wu Juexian would bow to someone else. Now, this scene had really happened. From this, it could be seen how unwilling and emotional Wu Juexian was. In the sky. Yi Xian closed his eyes slightly, then slowly opened them. A blood-red light flashed in his eyes, and the murderous aura of Tongtian circled around him. The cries of ghosts and gods could be heard from all directions. Dignity? Very well, then I'll fulfill your wish. His voice was like the universe, exploding the sky. When Yi Xian's voice rang out, it also caused Wu Juexian's face to turn red. His whole body was filled with a monstrous desire to fight. He shouted at Yi Xian, come and fight. Great Devil Fist. Heaven-defying slash. It was the same Great Devil Fist, but it shattered the void and exploded the heavens and earth. When Yi Xian's fist was blasted out, the terrifying devilish light covered the sky and covered the earth. Even the satellites were unable to capture this scene. However, in the midst of the monstrous devil light, a blade of light rose against the sky, but it was quickly annihilated by the devil light. Rumble. The heavens and the earth shook and the void collapsed. After a few dozen breaths, the world returned to normal. However, a figure covered in blood was falling from the sky. Brother Juexian. On the ground, Yi Lingtian cried out loudly. He took a step forward and rushed into the sky, flying directly toward Wu Juexian. Yi Lingtian caught Wu Juexian's body in the sky. However, when he saw Wu Juexian's tragic body, tears flowed from his eyes, and he kept apologizing. Large amounts of blood flowed from the corners of Wu Juexian's mouth. His body was cracked, but the smile on his face was like that of a child's. He muttered, I lost. Yes, I really lost. But the heavens have eyes. The path to immortality is not cut off. So what if Wu Juexian dies? At that moment, Wu Juexian fainted. Yi Lingtian carried Wu Juexian's battered body and landed on the ground. Buzz! The void shook and ripples spread. Yi Xian stepped down from the sky and quietly appeared in front of Yi Lingtian. He looked at the unconscious Wu Juexian and a thoughtful look flashed across his eyes. Bang! Suddenly, Yi Lingtian knelt on the ground. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He kept kowtowing to Yi Xian and said in a sorrowful voice, "Mr. Yi, please spare my brother's life. If you want to kill him, kill me because I started this war." At this moment, through the live broadcast of the satellite, the entire world was watching this scene. Everyone was nervous and silent because everyone knew that Yi Xian was a god of slaughter. All of his enemies would die without a burial ground. "You can go," Yi Xian said calmly. He looked deeply at the unconscious Wu Juexian, then turned around and returned to the Qingyun hut under everyone's shocked gazes. "Thank you, Mr. Yi, for sparing my life. I kowtow to you." Yi Lingtian did not expect Yi Xian to spare his brother's life. This made him very emotional. He kept kowtowing to Yi Xian's back and quickly left the place with Wu Juexian in his arms. Wu Juexian lost. Yes, he did lose. This is a legend of an era. This is the end of an era. A new legend has been born. Yi Xian is the top expert of the East. The emissaries of the various countries and the warriors of the Xia all sighed at this war of the century. Then, they all left. However, this war of the century would be recorded in the annals of human history. It would leave behind a legend for future generations to look forward to. A waning moon hung in the sky, and stars filled the starry sky. The bright moonlight sprinkled down, illuminating Yi Xian without a speck of dust, as if he was an immortal in a painting. Yi Xian stood alone under the moon with a calm expression. A cool breeze blew over, causing his clothes to slightly rustle. He looked at the bright moon in the sky, and when his eyes opened and closed, they were slightly deep. It was unknown what he was thinking in his heart. At some point, Fatso Huang quietly appeared beside Yi Xian. There was obvious confusion on his face. "Sir, why didn't you kill him?" Chapter 161. A faint smile appeared on Yi Xian's lips. He looked up at the sky and said calmly, "Killing is just a method, and it is also my nature. However, Wu Juexian is different. My cultivation is much higher than his. Today's battle was an unfair victory. If I kill him, my dignity tells me that it is not allowed. Mister, you can't do that. This Wu Juexian is a monstrous genius. Even though he lost the battle with you today, if his cultivation level increases greatly in the future, he will definitely come and fight you again. What if you?" Fatty Huang said anxiously. "Ha!" Yi Xian smiled. However, his smile was mysterious and deep. He turned to look at Fatso Huang and said in a low voice, "In this world, there is no one who is my opponent. Wu Juexian is someone I want to nurture. I want to see how far he can go on the path of martial arts because I am too lonely, so lonely that I have no opponent. However, he has given me a glimmer of hope." Looking at Yi Xian's mysterious smile, Fatso Huang was stunned. In truth, although he had not followed Yi Xian for a long time, he understood Yi Xian's sinister nature very well. However, to what extent Yi Xian's cultivation had reached, this had always been a mystery. He wanted to ask, but he swallowed the words that came out of his mouth. "Furthermore, I have a premonition that in a few days, Wu Juexian will personally come. That's because he knows that only I can help him step onto the Immortal's road to heaven, and he will be of use to me. That's the reason why I didn't kill him." Yi Xian smiled. His voice was extremely certain, which caused Fatso Huang's expression to change greatly. He looked at Yi Xian in a daze. You mean Wu Juexian will join the underworld?" Fatso Huang said in shock. You will know when the time comes. Yi Xian smiled mysteriously and turned to return to the Azure Cloud Pavilion, leaving Fatso Huang alone in a daze. However, there was an extremely excited look in his eyes. Wu Juexian was a proud man. If Yi Xian did not exist, he would be an unbeatable figure. However, would such a proud person really be willing to submit to Yi Xian? Fatso Huang did not dare to think about it, but he had an extremely strong premonition. This premonition came from his blind worship of Yi Xian. Fatso Huang knew that his master would never do anything he was not confident in. The world was in an uproar. Wu Juexian's defeat was simply shocking. However, it caused Yi Xian's name to spread all over the world. He was truly recognized by the world as the #1 expert in the East. No one could compete with him. It was also at this time that the envoys that Japan had just sent were rushing towards Jiangnan City. The envoys originally wanted to take back the Muramasa demon blade from Yi Xian, but they were quickly recalled by the Japanese emperor. It was obvious that Yi Xian's terror caused the Japanese to be extremely fearful. It was not just the Japanese. The Saintess of Korea was also rushing to the Xia kingdom. She wanted to meet Yi Xian, the #1 expert in the East. There were also messages from major forces all over the world, congratulating Yi Xian on his ascension to the throne of the #1 expert in the East. At the same time, countless ancient martial ability users were stationed in Jiangnan City. Many young talents went to the Qingyun Villa every day, wanting to be Yi Xian's disciple. Some of these young talents came from the Xia kingdom, while others came from all over the world. However, without exception, they were all outstanding figures of major forces. They wanted to be Yi Xian's disciple, so that the forces behind them could be branded with Yi Xian's name. These days, Yi Xian was extremely annoyed. It was not until Yi Xian ordered Fatso Huang to kill all the young men and women sent by the major forces that the Qingyun Villa welcomed a rare moment of peace. Logically speaking, the deaths of the young geniuses of the various major powers would definitely cause them to fly into a rage and descend into a thunderous rage. However, they knew that the person they were facing was Yi Xian, the #1 expert of the East. They didn't even dare to fart and dejectedly retrieve the corpses of these young geniuses, not daring to disturb Yi Xian's peace. The name of a person, the shadow of a tree, this was Yi Xian's current might, causing the entire world to fear him to the extreme. After all, 100 years ago, Wu Juexian swept through the East and even the West. Even such a terrifying man was defeated by Yi Xian. How could they dare to be impudent to Yi Xian? At the same time, in the emperor's pavilion in Japan. The emperor of Japan sat on his golden throne. Below him were many Japanese warriors kneeling. The atmosphere in this space was extremely stifling. Emperor, the Muramasa demon blade is the most precious treasure of our country. How can it fall into the hands of Yi Xian? That's right. The Kusanagi sword has been missing for a long time. This Muramasa demon blade is extremely important to our country. It is the key to opening the door of the spirit-branded god. If we can't get it back, it will cause great damage to our country. The many courtiers spoke one after another, causing the Emperor of Japan's face to darken. He did not speak for a long time. Emperor, bam! Enough! Suddenly, the Emperor of Japan smashed the jade beside him. He looked at the courtiers with a ferocious expression and said, even Wu Juexian was defeated by him. How do you expect me to get back the Muramasa demon blade? Have you all forgotten? 100 years ago, Wu Juexian stepped into Japan and defeated our samurai one by one. This humiliation has not been washed away until now. Even Wu Juexian was not a match for Yi Xian. Do you all want history to repeat itself? The Emperor of Japan roared furiously. This caused the courtiers to keep quiet out of fear. After dozens of breaths, the Emperor of Japan suppressed his anger. His face darkened and he said, the Muramasa demon blade must not be lost. It is also the key to opening the door of the spirit-branded god. Since we can't do it openly, we'll take it secretly. Men, tell the Muramasa family that no matter what method they use, they must take back the Muramasa demon blade. If they can't complete the task, let everyone in the Muramasa family commit suicide. The Emperor of Japan said gloomily. He also ordered a servant to quickly pass his order to the Muramasa family. At the same time, in the west, in a luxurious manner, the thick smell of blood floated in the air. A large number of corpses lay in a pool of blood. A blonde woman was bathed in blood. She was half kneeling on the ground with a western longsword in her hand. Her eyes were red and tears blurred her vision. Tell me, who are you? What grudge do I have with you that you want to kill my entire family? Sword Saint Sith clenched his silver teeth. The hatred in his eyes seemed to have solidified. He was roaring loudly. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for not understanding the situation. You want to take revenge for that trash Badao. Since you dare to go against my master, you should be prepared to die. The leader of the blood fiends from the underworld, Steamed Bun, held a blood-red longsword in his hand. He was looking coldly at Sword Saint Sith. Behind him were the members of the blood fiends group. They had already slaughtered the entire manor. Yi Xian. It's him. Sword Saint Sith's eyes were wide open. He clenched his fists tightly. His eyes were filled with indescribable hatred. Sword Saint Sith, today is the day you die. Go to hell with your family. Steamed Bun smiled cruelly. The blood-red longsword streaked through the air and slashed towards Sword Saint Sith. An extremely bloodthirsty light flashed in Steamed Bun's eyes. Clearly, he was about to complete the mission Yi Xian had given him. He was in a good mood. Suddenly, at this critical moment, a sinister laugh came from the void. A blood-red light enveloped Sword Saint Sith. Under Steamed Bun's shocked gaze, Sword Saint Sith disappeared. Insolence! Who dares to stop the underworld from killing people? Steamed Bun roared. The blood-red longsword in his hand buzzed. He looked around, searching for the mysterious person who had rescued Sword Saint Sith. Kakik. Go back and tell Yi Xian that our battle with him has only just begun. Soon, we will let him know what true despair is. A sinister laugh came from all directions. As this voice went further and further away, Steamed Bun's expression turned extremely gloomy. The evil aura around him became even more terrifying. Chapter 162. Inside the Azure Cloud Pavilion, in an ancient pavilion, there was a stone table and a pot of tea. Yi Xian's expression was indifferent as he tasted the tea in his cup. He felt a sense of ease and contentment. Wu Juexian, a legend of an era, looked at Yi Xian silently with a complicated look in his eyes. Brother Yi, Wu Juexian wanted to say something but stopped. Yi Xian smiled and said, you want me to teach you the way of immortality. Brother Yi, please help me. Wu Juexian stood up and bowed. His expression was very serious. Yi Xian smiled and looked at Wu Juexian, enter the underworld and be my servant for 100 years. Are you willing? Brother Yi, can you change your condition? Wu Juexian was definitely not an idiot, and was even an extremely intelligent person. He knew that he had a request for Yi Xian today, so the other party would definitely raise a condition. However, this condition was truly difficult for him. Yi Xian shook his head slowly and said in a low voice, if you are willing to stay in the underworld, you can take a peek at the way of immortality. If you are not willing, then leave. Wu Juexian was obsessed with martial arts all his life for the way of immortality. Now that the opportunity was in front of him, how could he give it up? I promise you. In just a few breaths, Wu Juexian made his decision. Obviously, he could not refuse the temptation of the way of immortality, nor did he want to refuse. 100 years as a servant seemed like a long time. But to be able to enter the way of immortality, this was a good deal for Wu Juexian. Actually, the so-called immortal cultivation method is completely useless in this world. This jade slip contains the method to refine blood qi. Only by absorbing enough blood qi to replace spirit qi will your path of martial arts be improved qualitatively. A jade scroll was thrown to Wu Juexian, who quickly caught it. His eyes were filled with excitement. From now on, you are the vice mansion master of the underworld. If I am not in the underworld, all decisions will be made by you. Yi Xian looked at Wu Juexian silently, then stood up and walked into the house. In the west, in a mysterious place, there was a black palace standing tall. Inside the black palace, there was a blood-red altar, a black flag with a crescent moon, and a matrix. Sword Saint Sith was bathed in blood. She howled in agony within the matrix. The dark, blood-red light enveloped her body, and terrifying fangs appeared in her mouth. Yi Xian, you killed my entire family. Even if I become a demon from hell, I'll eat your flesh and drink your blood. Sith Sword Saint howled in agony. His ferocious face was enough to make one's soul tremble. A black-robed, violet-gold figure was seated atop a white-bone throne. His eyes, which were covered by the violet-gold robe, were glowing with a dark light as he stared at Sword Saint Sith. A voice that was neither male nor female slowly rang out from his mouth. Azura secret technique, myriad ghost devouring body. When you master this technique, it will be time for you to seek revenge on Yi Xian. On both sides of the hall, tens of thousands of black-robed people were half kneeling on the ground. A large amount of blood-red light was blooming around them. Even the void was trembling slightly. Moon Goddess. Like a tsunami, the void shook. Under the shouts of tens of thousands of black-robed people, the person called Moon Goddess stood up from the white-bone throne. She looked at the crescent moon in the sky, and the dark light in her eyes burned brighter. It's not far. It's really not far. Give me a little more time and I'll be able to return to my peak. I'll be able to step onto the Tongtian path again and return to the Earth God realm, Moon Goddess muttered. Her eyes, which were covered by the violet gold robe, shone with an unimaginable blood-red light. Jiangnan City, Azure Cloud Compound. Tap, tap, tap. Yi Xian's fingers tapped on the table, making rhythmic sounds. Steamed Bun bowed to one side. He looked extremely ashamed. Obviously, this was the first time he had carried out Yi Xian's mission, and he had failed. This made him unable to face Yi Xian. Please punish me. Steamed Bun knelt down. This is not your fault. Get up, Yi Xian said calmly. Looking at Yi Xian's calm face, Fatso Huang asked, Sir, do you know who saved Sword Saint Sith? Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not answer Fatso Huang's question. A cruel smile appeared on his face, and a blood-red light flashed in his eyes. Tell Wu Juexian to lead the members of the Mansion of the Dead to the west and find out where Sword Saint Sith is, Yi Xian ordered. Yes, sir. Fatso Huang accepted the order and left. All of you, leave as well. After Yi Xian dismissed everyone, he leaned back on the sofa. His face gradually became gloomy because he knew that the remnant souls of the immortals were finally going to make their move. Interesting. Let me see how much your cultivation has recovered after a year of hibernation. Yi Xian smiled coldly. A murderous intent flashed in his eyes. While Yi Xian was deep in thought, Zhuo Junting quickly walked over and handed an envelope to Yi Xian. Sir, here is a letter for you. Yi Xian frowned. He casually opened the envelope and looked at the contents of the letter. After a dozen breaths of time, Yi Xian's expression gradually became serious. It was unknown what he was thinking. It's her. Yi Xian muttered to himself. Jiangnan City, in an ordinary coffee shop. Xia Qingzhu frowned slightly. She held a spoon and stirred the coffee in her cup in a daze. Beside her, a young girl accompanied her and whispered something to her from time to time. However, the appearance of these two stunning women immediately became a beautiful scenery in the coffee shop. It was unknown how many men were infatuated and were secretly watching the two of them. They even made their girlfriends ruthlessly pinch their boyfriends to express their dissatisfaction in their hearts. "Will he really come?" the girl asked. Xia Qingzhu bit her lips. Her eyes were confused and she said, "This is the memory of him and me. If he still cares about our old relationship, he will definitely come." Suddenly, the door of the coffee shop was pushed open. A slender figure entered the coffee shop and strolled towards Xia Qingzhu. Yi Xian. When Yi Xian appeared in front of her, Xia Qingzhu bit her lips and even her voice trembled slightly. It was calm and silent. Even when Yi Xian sat across from Xia Qingzhu, there was no fluctuation in his eyes when he looked at this woman. It was as if he was looking at a stranger. "What can I do for you?" Yi Xian asked calmly. 10,000 years in a glance, youth in an instant. It was the same place, the same person. But at this moment, Xia Qingzhu helplessly found that everything had changed. The man in front of her was no longer the young man. The way he looked at her no longer had the love he had in the past. "Do you hate me?" Xia Qingzhu lowered her eyes and asked. "If you just want to catch up with me, I don't think it's necessary," Yi Xian said calmly. Chapter 163. A line of tears flowed from Xia Qingzhu's eyes. She slowly raised her head and looked at Yi Xian. Her voice trembled as she said, "I came to find you today to ask you, if I'm willing to leave the Xia family, can we return to the past?" Looking at the tears on Xia Qingzhu's face, Yi Xian was stunned. Then, he slowly shook his head and said, "Once you miss something, you can never go back. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first." "Hey, what's wrong with you? My sister came all the way here to find you. How can you treat her like this?" The girl's face flushed red as she scolded Yi Xian. "Who are you?" Yi Xian asked calmly as he looked at the girl's unruly appearance. "I'm her younger sister. I just want to tell you that my sister is about to marry into Japan. I came this time because I hope you can take her away because she has never forgotten you," the girl said with a red face. "Marry into Japan?" Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at Xia Qingzhu silently. No one could tell what he was thinking. "So you're getting married? Congratulations." Yi Xian's voice was still calm. Xia Qingzhu bitterly smiled as she looked at Yi Xian, who didn't move at all. Her eyes were filled with despair, and at this moment, she trembled as she took out a wedding invitation and handed it over to Yi Xian. Her voice was bitter as she said, "7 days from now is my engagement day. I hope you can personally come and give me your blessings." "Okay, I'll definitely be there." Yi Xian took the wedding invitation and walked out of the coffee shop. However, after taking a few steps, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and looked at Xia Qingzhu. He said in a low voice, "Don't you want to say something to me?" Looking at Yi Xian's calm face, Xia Qingzhu held her breath. Then, she slowly shook her head and did not say anything else. However, a trace of guilt flashed across her eyes. A faint smile appeared on Yi Xian's face. He did not stay any longer. He walked out of the coffee shop and gradually disappeared from Xia Qingzhu's sight. In the coffee shop, Xia Qingzhu's eyes drooped as streams of tears flowed out of her eyes. When she raised her head again, her face was already covered in tears. "Yi Xian, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Please don't blame me, it seems that you were right. He is indeed a heartless person. You have done well this time. As long as this matter is completed, we will definitely not treat you unfairly." The young girl's angry face gradually turned gloomy, and her voice was extremely cold. She no longer looked like a young girl. Instead, she looked like a terrifying killer who had experienced the world for a long time. Inside Qingyun Lodge. Yi Xian clasped his hands behind his back as he gazed into the distant sky. His eyes were deep and filled with the vicissitudes of life as he slowly muttered. Xia Qingzhu, I've already given you a chance. It's you who doesn't know how to cherish it. In that case, let me see exactly what you want to do. The eyes were the windows to the soul. No matter how good a person's acting skills were, they would more or less give the game away. Yi Xian knew Xia Qingzhu very well. Although this woman concealed it very well, Yi Xian could still see some things from her eyes. Hatred, helplessness, guilt, and some indescribable emotions. The young girl beside Xia Qingzhu seemed to be an ordinary person. She had cultivated some kind of technique that completely concealed her cultivation. She didn't dare to reveal anything in front of Yi Xian. But who was Yi Xian? He was a cultivator at the tribulation stage and had a half-immortal body. He was very sensitive to auras. With a simple glance, Yi Xian could tell that the young girl was a connate martial artist. Although Yi Xian didn't know what Xia Qingzhu wanted to do, it didn't matter. Because Yi Xian knew that some ants couldn't help but want to attack him. They were afraid of his cultivation and didn't dare to do it openly. They could only use Xia Qingzhu to achieve their goal. 7 days later. Caesar Hotel, Jiangnan City. All kinds of luxurious cars were parked in front of the hotel. Celebrities from all walks of life came out of the cars. Master Xia was greeting the guests with a smile on his face. Inside the Caesar Hotel. Guests gathered in twos and threes. They held red wine glasses and talked from time to time. It was as if they were here for a party instead of a wedding banquet. However, they looked out of the corner of their eyes from time to time, as if they were waiting for someone to appear. Today is my daughter's engagement banquet. I, Xia Taijun, am honored to have all my old friends here. Here's a toast to you. Xia Taijun raised his glass to toast the guests, but he only got a sparse response. This made Xia Taijun blush and an awkward smile appeared on his face. In fact, this engagement banquet seemed grand and luxurious, and the guests were even more extraordinary. However, these guests didn't come because of the Xia family. They really came here because of one person. Yi Xian. Yes, it was Yi Xian. Ever since Yi Xian defeated Wu Juexian and became the #1 expert in the East, everyone wanted to build a relationship with Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian never saw any guests, which made them feel very helpless. The so-called Xia family, which used to be one of the 8 great families in Jingdu, had long declined and was no longer as glorious as before. If the guests didn't know that Xia Qingzhu used to be in a relationship with Yi Xian, they wouldn't have come at all. The guests from all over the world came here today to attend Xia Qingzhu's engagement banquet, but it was more accurate to say that they were waiting for Yi Xian to appear. If Yi Xian could appear here, as long as they could build a relationship with him, it would be enough for them to brag about for the rest of their lives. There have been rumors that Mr. Yi and the Xia family's daughter are old friends. Do you think this rumor is true? I don't think so. If the two of them really have an old relationship, why would the Xia family dare to marry their daughter to Japan? Aren't they afraid of Mr. Ye's wrath? Sigh, I thought that Yi Xian would be here, but now it seems that I came here for nothing. The guests discussed in low voices. Although their voices were very soft, they fell into Xia Tiejuan's ears. This made his face turn red, but helplessness and regret flashed across his eyes. It was no wonder that Xia Taijun felt regretful. Back then, he was still the head of the Xia family, and he strongly opposed Xia Qingzhu and Yi Xian being together. However, after a few years, the young man that he used to look down on had grown into a person that the world respected. How could Xia Taijun not sigh? Mr. Yi Xian has arrived. Suddenly, a cry of surprise came from outside the door, which stunned the guests. Then, ecstasy appeared on their faces as they all looked at the door. Yi Xian, dressed in black, was walking toward the crowd. When he reached the center, the guests quickly bowed and greeted him. Everyone's faces were filled with excitement. "Greetings, Mr. Yi. Mr. Yi, I'm the head of the Fong family. This is my business card." Mr. Yi, before Xia Taijun could step forward, the guests quickly arrived in front of Yi Xian. All sorts of flattering voices were heard. Everyone's faces were filled with excitement, and they kept introducing themselves to Yi Xian. It was also at this moment that Xia Taijun hurriedly pushed the crowd away and quickly walked to Yi Xian. He forced a smile and said, "Nephew Yi, please take a seat." Chapter 164. In the face of Xia Taijun's enthusiasm, Yi Xian was very calm. He was as calm as a lake without any ripples. Yi Xian clearly remembered that when he was young, it was this man who looked down on him and told him to leave his daughter. He also told him that he was an abandoned son of the Yi family and was not worthy of his daughter. The stars moved and the years passed like a shuttle. The once humble boy grew up to be a dragon in the sky, while Xia Taijun became an insignificant ant. This was perhaps the pain in Xia Taijun's heart for the rest of his life. Under Xia Taijun's guidance, Yi Xian sat in the first row. It was also at this time that the engagement ceremony finally began. Elegant and melodious music was played. A bright red carpet was spread out. The red carpet was covered with fresh flowers. Two figures were walking from the end of the red carpet. Xia Qingzhu was dressed in a white wedding dress. She looked cold and noble, and her exquisite collarbone was exposed. Her skin, which looked as if it had been carved from ivory, shone with a crystalline light. Xia Qingzhu was truly beautiful. It was a kind of cold and elegant beauty. At this moment, she was holding the arm of the man beside her and slowly walking towards the priest. The man beside Xia Qingzhu was dressed in a Japanese kimono. He was about 20 years old. His face was very handsome, but at this moment, his face was a little pale and his gaze was erratic. Until the two of them walked past Yi Xian was also very calm. He looked at Xia Qingzhu's back indifferently. When he opened and closed his eyes, his gaze was a little erratic. That year, he was young and tender. That year, she had her first awakening of love. The young Yi Xian once had a dream, and that was to personally put on a white wedding dress for Xia Qingzhu. Just like now, he would hold her hand and hold a grand wedding under the witness of the priest. However, 4 years of life in the blood sea made him gradually mature and grow up. In Yi Xian's eyes, his dream was just a joke. The wedding march was playing. The couple exchanged engagement rings under the blessing of the priest. When the engagement ceremony was completed, all the guests present applauded. Clap, clap, clap. Yi Xian smiled and applauded. It was as if he was really here to attend the wedding and bring his most sincere blessings. After the ceremony ended, a luxurious banquet began. Xia Qingzhu and the man beside her toasted the guests one by one to express their thanks for coming. Yi Xian was the center of attention. When Xia Qingzhu walked towards Yi Xian, the guests fell silent. They all focused their gazes on Yi Xian as a strange light flashed through their eyes. Obviously, the rumors that Yi Xian and Xia Qingzhu were old friends had never been proven. However, today was Xia Qingzhu's wedding, and Yi Xian had really appeared. Obviously, this rumor was not baseless. This caused all sorts of thoughts to arise in the hearts of the guests present. Hey, do you think this Mr. Yi will snatch her away and take her away from here? Have you watched too many movies? If Mr. Yi really wanted to do that, he would have done it long ago. How could the mere Xia family dare to stop him? That's right. Such a melodramatic plot only exists in movies. If Mr. Yi really does that, I'm afraid the Xia family will be overjoyed. After all, with the reputation of the #1 expert in the East, the Xia family will rise again. The guests present discussed animatedly as they watched the development of the situation. At this moment, Under everyone's gaze, Xia Qingzhu and the Japanese man arrived in front of Yi Xian. A waiter brought a pot of wine and bowed beside Xia Qingzhu. Looking at Yi Xian's calm face, Xia Qingzhu bit her lips and said bitterly, "Yi Xian, thank you for attending my wedding. Once, when I was young, I had a dream, and that was to personally put on a wedding dress for you. Although this dream didn't come true, being able to see you in a wedding dress today can be considered as fulfilling my wish back then," Yi Xian said with a smile, giving people a sense of tranquility and indifference. Brother Yi. Thank you for attending my wedding with Qingzhu. This little brother toasts you. The Japanese man's face was pale, and even his voice was trembling slightly. However, he still filled the cup with wine and handed it to Yi Xian. "Are you afraid of me?" Yi Xian said with deep eyes. Although Yi Xian was smiling, the Japanese man's legs were a little weak. Cold sweat kept flowing from his forehead, and he could not continue speaking. "Yi Xian, don't mind him. My husband hasn't seen much of the world. Naturally, he's a little nervous when he sees a big shot like you." Xia Qingzhu's face turned pale and she quickly explained. Yes, that's right, please forgive me, Brother Yi." The Japanese man wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and said with a trembling voice. Xia Qingzhu raised the wine jug and filled the cup with wine. However, her action caused Yi Xian to narrow his eyes. This was because Yi Xian could feel that Xia Qingzhu's arm was trembling slightly when she poured the wine for him. "Yi Xian, thank you for attending Qingzhu's wedding. I toast you with this cup of wine." Without waiting for Yi Xian to speak, Xia Qingzhu raised her head and drank the wine in the cup. Her delicate face flushed red. Looking at the clear wine in the cup, Yi Xian smiled. He did not drink the wine in the cup. Instead, he looked deeply at Xia Qingzhu and said, "Do you really want me to drink this cup of wine?" As Yi Xian's words fell, Xia Taijun and Xia Qingzhu's faces instantly turned pale. However, this was not the end. With a plop, the Japanese man's legs went soft and he collapsed to the ground. His body could not help but tremble. Such a scene stunned the guests present, and a sense of uneasiness rose in their hearts. "My son-in-law was born with epilepsy. Someone, quickly take him away and let the doctor treat him," Xia Taijun quickly said. A waiter quickly took the Japanese man away. At this moment, Yi Xian held the wine cup in his hand and looked at Xia Qingzhu quietly. This made the woman's eyes fill with tears. She did not dare to look into Yi Xian's eyes. Crack! Yi Xian finished the wine in the cup in one gulp and casually threw the wine cup to the ground. The sound of the wine cup shattering could be heard at this moment. "Yi Xian, I'm sorry." Bang! Xia Qingzhu knelt on the ground. A large amount of tears wet the ground. Her body was trembling, and her heart was filled with guilt. A woman's tears are really cheap. Looking at Xia Qingzhu kneeling in front of him, Yi Xian smiled coldly. Then, he looked around and said, "You've been watching for so long. It's time for you to come out." Clap, clap, clap. Suddenly, the sound of clapping could be heard. The girl who had once accompanied Xia Qingzhu walked out from the shadows. Her face was filled with a smug and sinister smile. Dozens of black-clothed warriors also walked out from the shadows. Terrifying killing intent filled the entire wedding banquet. There's an old saying in Xia country that heroes can't resist the charms of beautiful women. "Mr. Yi, I have to say that you knew that the wine was poisoned, but you still drank it. This makes me admire you greatly." The girl praised Yi Xian as she clapped. However, the way she looked at Yi Xian was as if she was looking at a dead person. Chapter 165. Let me introduce myself. I'm the 14th head of the Muramasa family, Muramasa Yoshiko. Perhaps you don't know me, but my useless brother, Muramasa Haoyue, died in the hands of your subordinates. Muramasa Yoshiko smiled and bowed to Yi Xian, appearing gentle and polite. At this moment, Yi Xian put his hands behind his back and looked at Muramasa Yoshiko indifferently. A cold smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and he said calmly, "In order to take back the Muramasa demon blade, you Japanese can be said to be unscrupulous. Even Xia Qingzhu was subdued by you. I have to say that your methods are indeed much better than your brother's. Mr. Yi, you flatter us because I know that we are no match for you at all. We can only use some shameless methods to take back the Muramasa demon blade. As for Xia Qingzhu, we only promised her that we would help her Xia family rise again in Xia country. As for the exchange, it's naturally your life," Muramasa Yoshiko said with a smile. "How can you be so sure that a mere cup of poisonous wine can make me wait for death?" Yi Xian's expression was still calm. "Lovers' tears is the world's most poisonous poison, and it's also an absolute poison passed down from generation to generation in my Muramasa family. In the past 1,000 years, countless peerless experts have died under this absolute poison. Even if Mr. Ye's cultivation is unparalleled, in the face of this world's most poisonous poison, you can only turn into a pool of blood and die. Mr. Yi, I have to say that you're too arrogant. If you were ruthless enough to kill Xia Qingzhu and throw away this cup of poisonous wine, we would turn around and leave. From then on, we would never dare to dream of taking back the Muramasa demon blade. Unfortunately, you didn't harden your heart in the end. This is also destined for you to die today." Muramasa Yoshiko smiled sweetly. She was really proud and had great confidence in lovers' tears because this kind of poison in the world was incurable. She had never heard of anyone who could survive. Buzz. Suddenly, without waiting for Muramasa Yoshiko to react, Yi Xian took a step forward, and the surrounding void exploded. A jade-like palm quietly grabbed Muramasa Yoshiko's neck and directly lifted her into the air. Cluck! 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 Yi Xian's fingers tightened slightly. Muramasa Yoshiko's neck twisted strangely, and a strange sound came from her throat. She had difficulty breathing, and her eyes widened in fear. She looked at Yi Xian with a horrified expression. "No. Impossible. You. How can you use Neishi?" Muramasa Yoshiko screamed in horror, her hands and feet struggling in the air. "Even the 9-in sunflower water can't harm my half-immortal body, let alone the poison of the mortal world. You can die in peace." Yi Xian smiled sinisterly, and a terrifying force came from his palm. Muramasa Yoshiko's neck was broken, and she died. Bang! Yi Xian casually tossed the woman's corpse to the ground as his cold voice rang out. "Beichen, kill them all. Leave no one alive. This subordinate obeys." A cruel sneer was heard. At some point, Gu Beichen quietly appeared behind Yi Xian with a blood-red long sword in his hand. Like a ferocious tiger entering a flock of sheep, he charged towards the black-clothed samurais with a bloodthirsty and violent aura. The blood-red sword flew through the air, and the killing was silent. Only a large amount of blood soaked the wedding banquet. Dozens of samurais in black fled in a sorry state. However, under Gu Beichen's terrifying killing, these samurais helplessly realized that they could not escape at all. They could only become lambs waiting to be slaughtered. At this moment, Yi Xian's expression was cold and ruthless. The blood-red light around him slowly bloomed. He was silently watching Xia Qingzhu. Xia Taijun had already knelt on the ground, his legs weak. His eyes were filled with despair. "Nephew. Nephew Yi. It's all because these Japanese forced us. Spare. Spare our lives." Xia Taijun begged loudly, deeply afraid that Yi Xian would kill them both here. "Yi Xian, if you want to kill me, then kill me. To be able to die in your hands, Qingzhu has no regrets." Xia Qingzhu had a smile on her face. There wasn't the slightest bit of fear on her face as she quietly looked at Yi Xian. "Sir, if you can't bear to do it, let me do it." Gu Beichen strode over. The blood-red sword in his hand was already stained with blood. The so-called Japanese samurais were all slaughtered by him. However, Gu Beichen also knew that Yi Xian could not bear to kill his lover of the past. "Back off," Yi Xian said softly. Gu Beichen was stunned, but he still retreated behind Yi Xian. However, disappointment appeared in his eyes. It seemed that Yi Xian still had feelings for this woman and intended to spare their lives. At this moment, the killing intent around Yi Xian disappeared without a trace. His eyes were slightly unfocused as he walked slowly towards Xia Qingzhu. A trace of love that he had never had before appeared in his eyes. "Qingzhu, did you know that when I was young, my biggest dream was to personally put on your wedding dress for you and let you grow old with me and live happily for the rest of our lives?" Yi Xian gently stroked Xia Qingzhu's hair. His eyes were filled with love. It was as if he had returned to those youthful days and was caressing Xia Qingzhu's soft hair just like now. Looking at Yi Xian's loving gaze, Xia Qingzhu's heart ached. Memories of their childhood together surfaced in her mind. At this moment, she suddenly hugged Yi Xian. A line of clear tears flowed from her eyes, wetting Yi Xian's clothes. "Big brother Yi Xian, I've let you down. I really know that I was wrong. Can you forgive Qingzhu and let us return to the past?" A trace of sadness and self-mockery quietly flashed across Yi Xian's eyes. His thoughts drifted as memories hidden in his mind surfaced. That year, a young man and a young woman sat on a haystack in autumn and swore to the heavens. "Big brother Yi Xian, Qingzhu will definitely marry you when she grows up. Will you marry Qingzhu?" "Yes, I definitely will. As long as Qingzhu doesn't leave me, I, Yi Xian, swear to the heavens that I will definitely marry you." Childhood sweethearts, innocent childhood sweethearts. A young man and a young woman played and chased each other into the distance. This was a memory that Yi Xian would never forget. His thoughts turned. It was as if he was in front of him. Yi Xian slowly stroked Xia Qingzhu's cheek. Xia Qingzhu's exquisite face seemed to have turned into a young girl of the past. It made his eyes blurry and wet. Crack. Suddenly, the sound of bones breaking could be heard. A jade-like hand was wrapped around Xia Qingzhu's neck. Large amounts of blood flowed from Xia Qingzhu's mouth. Her eyes were unfocused as she stared blankly at the man in front of her. She was unable to speak for a long time. Why? Blood continued to flow from the corners of Xia Qingzhu's mouth, soaking her pure white wedding gown into a beautiful and mournful color. Even at the moment of her death, she could not believe that Yi Xian would be so heartless as to personally end her life. "Xia Qingzhu, do you still remember? That year at Jiangnan Hospital, when I was seriously ill and on the verge of death, you also shed a tear. Then, you resolutely left my side. From that moment on, I knew that this so-called love was only my own wishful thinking. You, Xia Qingzhu, have always placed your own interests above all else." Yi Xian's eyes, which had been filled with love, gradually turned cold. When his eyes opened and closed, they were filled with ruthlessness and mercilessness. "Today, you were able to kill me with poisoned wine in exchange for a chance for the Xia family to rise again because you knew that even if you failed, I, Yi Xian, would not kill you for the sake of our past relationship." Yi Xian's lips curled into a sinister smile as he said this. His voice was cold and harsh as he said, "However, you don't understand me at all. You really don't understand me. I'm no longer the green and tender youth of the past. The so-called bonds of love are nothing but a joke in my eyes. Ever since you left that year, the young girl I loved was already dead. Now, you're just a stranger in my eyes." Crack. Yi Xian broke Xia Qingzhu's neck with a smile, causing her body to gradually turn cold. However, Her eyes were wide open as she died, filled with great unwillingness and confusion. Even at the moment of her death, she could not believe that Yi Xian would kill her with his own hands. Bang! Yi Xian threw Xia Qingzhu's body to the ground as if he was throwing away trash. He looked at Xia Qingzhu's body indifferently and said in a calm voice, "Bury my once ignorant love, and bury the last bit of affection between you and me. You can rest in peace. My daughter." Xia Taijun cried out loudly as he watched Xia Qingzhu die tragically at Yi Xian's hands. Gu Beichen stared at the scene in front of him in a daze. His eyes were filled with horror. He had never thought that Yi Xian would be so vicious and merciless. With one thought, there is love in all rivers and mountains. With one thought, there is no love in the world. With one thought, there is no love in the world. Fate comes and goes. Let all of this disappear with the wind. Yi Xian strolled into the distance. His voice was calm and filled with vicissitudes of life. This caused Gu Beichen to quickly regain his senses. He stared blankly at Yi Xian's back and asked in a trembling voice, "Sir? Sir? Xia Taijun. Send the father and daughter to hell together." As Yi Xian's calm voice sounded, his back gradually disappeared from Gu Beichen's sight. Chapter 166. Qingyun Bungalow. In the dark dungeon, the sound of a whip lashing could be heard from time to time. It was accompanied by painful howls, sending chills down one's spine. A Japanese man was tied to a wooden stake. His skin and flesh were lacerated. Gu Beichen was whipping him fiercely, causing him to howl in agony. He was enduring unimaginable pain. Tap, tap, tap. A series of footsteps came from outside the dungeon. With Fatso Huang accompanying him, Yi Xian strolled into the water dungeon. This also made Gu Beichen put away his whip and quickly walked towards Yi Xian. "Sir, we've interrogated him. This person is a member of the Muramasa family." This time, the Muramasa family used Xia Qingzhu and her father to take back the Muramasa demon blade, Gu Beichen said. Mr. Yi. I beg you, please give me a quick death, the Japanese man said weakly. Because of Gu Beichen's vicious whipping, he was already seriously injured and on the verge of death. Listening to Gu Beichen's report, Yi Xian nodded slowly. Actually, there was no need to interrogate him. Yi Xian could guess that the Muramasa family used Xia Qingzhu to deal with him. It could only be to take back the Muramasa demon blade. However, Yi Xian did not understand one thing. Although the Muramasa demon blade was important, it was just a weapon. However, for the Japanese to value it so much, it was definitely not that simple. Bring him over. I have something to ask him, Yi Xian said softly. Soon, Gu Beichen brought the Japanese man to Yi Xian and made him kneel on the ground. He groaned from time to time. It was obvious that the pain on his body was somewhat unbearable. Tell me, what's the secret of the Muramasa demon blade? Yi Xian said calmly and looked at the person at his feet indifferently. Mr. Yi. I've said everything that needs to be said. This blade is the treasure of the Muramasa family. Naturally, we have to take it back, Fatso Huang snorted coldly. His voice was cruel as he said, looks like you won't cry until you're in the coffin. Since that's the case, don't blame me for being ruthless. Ah! Fatso Huang twisted the man's arm into the shape of a fried dough twist, causing the man to wail in agony before fainting. A basin of cold water was poured on this person, instantly waking him up from his coma. However, the pain coming from his right arm made him spasm on the ground. It was obvious that he was in extreme pain. I'll talk. The Japanese man's mind had completely collapsed. Like spilling beans, he revealed the secrets of the Muramasa demon blade. Muramasa's demon blade was one of Japan's divine weapons. It contained unimaginable power, and this was something that everyone knew. But this wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that the Muramasa demon sword was a key to open the door to the spirit-branded retainer. Legend has it that the long-lost Kusanagi sword was hidden within the Shikigami's door. Legend has it that the Kusanagi sword was the sword of a god and possessed the power to destroy the heavens and earth. Since ancient times, there had been a legend in Japan. Whoever could open the door to the spirit-branded retainer would be able to dominate the entire world. However, the Japanese royal family had never found out where the door to the spirit-branded retainer was. Although the Japanese royal family had not found the door to the spirit-branded retainer, they could not afford to lose the Muramasa demon blade. This was also the reason why the Emperor of Japan ordered the Muramasa family to take back the Muramasa demon blade from Yi Xian at all costs. Yi Xian. I've said everything that needs to be said, but I want to tell you, even if you're the number one expert in the East, you're still just one person. If you want to fight against the strength of an entire country, you'll only die without a burial ground. The Japanese man laughed bitterly. Blood flowed out of his mouth uncontrollably. He had actually committed suicide by biting his tongue. The strength of an entire country? Yi Xian muttered to himself. The corners of his mouth curled up into a cruel smile. His voice was unfathomable as he said, "Since you Japanese are courting death, then I'll play a good game with you." Jiangnan Airport. A flight to Japan was docked here. A large number of passengers were boarding the plane. "Sir, are you really going to Japan alone?" Fatso Huang asked with a worried expression. Wu Juexian has brought the members of the Mansion of the Dead to the west. With you guarding Jiangnan City, I can rest assured. With the Muramasa demon blade in my hands, the Japanese will definitely not let this matter rest. I'm a vengeful person. Since the Japanese dared to attack me, they'll have to pay a price. If I keep silent, won't the world think that I, Yi Xian, am easy to bully? Yi Xian smiled coldly and boarded the flight to Japan. However, his appearance had also undergone a great change at this moment. Japan, Emperor Pavilion. The Emperor of Japan's face was ashen. All the jade objects around him had been shattered. A group of courtiers trembled as they endured the Emperor's thunderous fury. "Trash, you're all trash. What should we do? What should we do now? Not only did we fail to take back the Muramasa demon blade, but dozens of Japanese samurai were also killed. I'm afraid that Yi Xian already knows that this was done by Japan. How can he let this matter rest?" The Emperor of Japan roared. If one listened carefully, they would notice that his voice was trembling. "Emperor, please calm down. The most important thing now is whether the secret of the Muramasa demon blade has been found out by Yi Xian. If he knows about this, it won't be a good thing for Japan," a courtier said worriedly. "Humph, so what if he knows? Even we Japanese can't find the gate of Shikigami. How can he, a mere person from Xia, find the gate of Shikigami?" "That's right. Even if Yi Xian's cultivation is unparalleled and he's the number one expert in the East, don't forget that he's just one person. How can he fight against the entire Japan with his bravery? In my opinion, find an opportunity to lure Yi Xian to a place where no one is around and directly launch an intercontinental missile. I don't believe that his body is made of diamond. Could it be that he can remain unharmed under an intercontinental missile?" All sorts of discussions were heard, causing the Emperor of Japan's expression to turn extremely gloomy. "Enough, you bunch of idiots. If we really use the intercontinental missile, not only will Yi Xian die, but even the cities in Xia will be destroyed. At that time, Xia won't let this matter rest. There will definitely be a war to destroy the country. How can Japan be a match for Xia? Don't you even have this bit of self-awareness?" As the Emperor of Japan roared furiously, the courtiers kept quiet out of fear and once again fell into dead silence. Looking at the disappointing courtiers, the Emperor of Japan sighed helplessly and said in a slightly dispirited voice, "Pass down my order. Don't provoke Yi Xian for the time being. Send the Foreign Affairs Minister to Xia. No matter what conditions they raise, as long as Yi Xian can return the Muramasa demon blade, Japan will definitely satisfy them. All of you, leave." As the Emperor of Japan dismissed everyone, he leaned weakly on his golden throne and kept rubbing his temples. Clearly, he was extremely frustrated. However, what the Emperor of Japan didn't know was that Yi Xian was currently heading towards Japan. Chapter 167. The sky was clear and the clouds were thick. A passenger plane headed to Japan flew through the clouds. In the first-class cabin, a young man with an ordinary appearance would not attract any attention if he was thrown into a crowd. However, when this person opened and closed his eyes, there was a flash of light from time to time. It was obvious that he was not as simple as he looked. Changing his appearance was very simple for Yi Xian. Since he was going to Japan, he naturally could not use his original appearance. After all, his battle with Wu Juexian had been broadcasted globally, and his appearance had been exposed to the world. If he really stepped into Japan with his original appearance, he would definitely attract the attention of the world. This was also something that Yi Xian did not want to see. The stewardess came over with a smile and spoke stiffly in the language of the Xia kingdom. She bowed and asked Yi Xian, "Sir, would you like something to drink?" "No need." Yi Xian slowly shook his head, holding an ancient book and reading it attentively. "Sir, this is my private number. If you need a guide when you arrive in Japan, you can call me." The stewardess secretly gave Yi Xian a note, then smiled and left. Looking at the note on the table, Yi Xian did not even look at it and casually threw it to the ground. Obviously, he was not interested in this stewardess at all. In fact, logically speaking, Yi Xian's current appearance was very ordinary. The stewardess of Japan flew all year round and did not have the habit of casually passing notes to people. Moreover, the Japanese had always looked down on the people of the Xia kingdom, so this kind of thing was even more impossible. What really attracted the stewardess was not Yi Xian, but the expensive clothes he was wearing. It was a low-key and luxurious watch, known as the Heart of the Ocean. There were only 5 models in the world, and its value was as high as 80 million. His clothes were personally designed by a Western designer, and the unique craftsmanship was extraordinary. Yi Xian's outfit was all handled by Zhuo Junting. Just Yi Xian's outfit alone was worth more than 100 million. The Japanese flight attendant had seen many high officials and nobles, so she could see the value of Yi Xian's outfit at a glance. That was why the scene just now happened. "This big brother, this is a genuine Japanese beauty. Aren't you interested in her at all?" In the first-class cabin, a short and fat young man happened to see this scene and asked Yi Xian in surprise. "If you want it, I'll give it to you." Yi Xian put down the ancient book and smiled. Really?" The pudgy young man's eyes lit up. He got up and walked over to Yi Xian. Then, he quickly picked up the note on the ground. A hint of excitement appeared in his eyes. "I'm Sun Xiaofu. I'm running a small business in Japan. May I know your name?" Sun Xiaofu asked. "Lu Jia, Lu as in water and land, Jia as in disaster. I heard that it's the season of cherry blossoms in Japan, so I naturally have to go and take a look." Yi Xian smiled. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Sun Xiaofu was stunned. He had never heard of such a strange name. However, he had been in the business world for many years, so he naturally did not show any surprise. "Big brother, let me tell you, the best thing about Japan is not the cherry blossoms. It's the Japanese women who are as gentle as water. Their figures." On the bed, Sun Xiaofu started talking non-stop. The smile on his face was extremely lewd. Clearly, Sun Xiaofu knew the taste of Japanese women. Yi Xian kept a smile on his face as he listened to Sun Xiaofu quietly. It was as if they were two old friends who had not seen each other for many years. It was impossible to tell that they were meeting for the first time. If it were any other time, Yi Xian would naturally not pay attention to Sun Xiaofu. However, he heard something from this person's words. Sun Xiaofu had been traveling all over Japan for many years. It could be said that he knew Japan very well. Wasn't he the best guide for him? Big brother, wait for me here. When we arrive in Japan, I'll treat you to a meal. The Japanese flight attendant who handed Yi Xian the note just now passed by the two of them and smiled charmingly at Yi Xian. This also made Sun Xiaofu's eyes turn. He smiled at Yi Xian obsequiously and got up to follow the Japanese flight attendant. Looking at this scene, even though Yi Xian was not a lecher, he could tell what Sun Xiaofu wanted to do. This made him slightly speechless. He picked up the ancient book on the table again and read it. Half an hour later, Sun Xiaofu returned. His forehead was covered in sweat, but there was a look of satisfaction on his face. As for the Japanese air stewardess, her hair was messy as she walked out of the washroom. It was clear what had happened. Big brother, it's all thanks to you this time that I could taste such a top-notch product. Sun Xiaofu smiled lecherously as if he was still immersed in the joy just now. This is your ability. It has nothing to do with me. Yi Xian smiled lightly. Big brother, if this Japanese flight attendant didn't think that you and I were friends, I wouldn't have been able to get close to her. You've helped me a lot. Sun Xiaofu smiled lecherously. Aren't we friends? Yi Xian smiled, which made Sun Xiaofu stunned. Then, he quickly smiled obsequiously and said, yes, yes, yes. Of course we are friends. Japan's airport. Yi Xian's flight landed safely. Yi Xian followed the crowd and got off the plane. Sun Xiaofu accompanied him the whole time. Obviously, he had become very familiar with Yi Xian along the way. Big brother, it's your first time in Japan. Let me welcome you today. Then, I'll take you around tomorrow. Outside the airport, a black car stopped beside Sun Xiaofu. It was obviously his private car in Japan. Yi Xian was alone and no one came to pick him up. This made Sun Xiaofu invite Yi Xian to get in the car. Creak. Suddenly, more than 10 world-class cars drove over from afar and stopped in front of Yi Xian in a few breaths. The car doors opened and more than 10 men in black got out. One of the middle-aged men quickly came to Yi Xian and bowed, Mr. Liu, welcome to Japan. Director Zhua has already arranged your accommodation. Yi Xian nodded slowly and turned to look at Sun Xiaofu. He smiled and said, little brother, it's my first time in Japan and I still lack a guide. I wonder if you're willing to be my guide. At this moment, Sun Xiaofu looked at the dozens of luxury cars in front of Yi Xian and his expression changed slightly. Although he had some assets in Japan, he knew that to send so many luxury cars to pick up Yi Xian, it was obvious that Yi Xian's identity was not ordinary. This also made Sun Xiaofu know that he was in luck. Without any objections, Sun Xiaofu agreed readily. Under Yi Xian's invitation, the two of them left Japan's airport in the same car. However, what Sun Xiaofu did not know was that Yi Xian might be his benefactor, but he was also an extremely terrifying demon who would bring unimaginable chaos to Japan. Chapter 168. At Sakura Corporation. This was a multinational corporation, which was also the company controlled by Zhuo Junting. In Japan, it was just a very ordinary business group. It could also be considered a stronghold that Zhuo Junting had built in Japan. Flowing Water Villa. It was a very poetic name. There was a small stream, and there were also green bamboos planted in it. A wind chime was hung on the door, and from time to time, there would be pleasant chimes. The house was like an ancient style. In the capital of Japan, it was indeed a rare high-end residence. In the courtyard, Sun Xiaofu's face was flushed, and he asked Yi Xian in a trembling voice, "Big brother, who exactly are you? How do you own such a property in Japan? Who I am is not important. What's important is whether you want to be above others." Yi Xian's eyes were deep, and his voice was as seductive as a demon's. "Above others?" Sun Xiaofu muttered to himself. He looked at Yi Xian with a slightly cautious gaze. Sun Xiaofu seemed to be lewd and absurd, but he was definitely not a fool. Otherwise, how could he survive in a foreign country for so many years and still have a small fortune? Sun Xiaofu deeply understood that there was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. If you wanted something, you had to give something of equivalent value. How could he not understand this principle? "Big brother Lu, just say it. What do you want me to do?" Sun Xiaofu's expression turned solemn. He had already begun to be wary of Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. The smile on his face disappeared, and a hint of coldness appeared. He said in a strange and sinister voice, "I want detailed information on all the underground forces in Japan, as well as the location of all the arsenals in Japan. As long as you do these things for me, I'll give you unimaginable money and power." As Yi Xian's words fell, Sun Xiaofu's face instantly turned pale. His eyes widened, and his voice trembled as he said, "Arsenals? Arsenals? Who? Who are you? What do you want?" "What do I want?" Yi Xian's lips curled into a cold smile. His eyes were sinister as he said, "Of course we have to do something interesting. After all, this tiny country has been quiet for too long. Big brother, just pretend that I never came here today. I have never seen you before. Goodbye." Sun Xiaofu turned around and left without stopping. Although Yi Xian didn't reveal his plan, Sun Xiaofu wasn't a fool. It involved the military power of Japan, and this was something unimaginable. Although Sun Xiaofu was greedy and liked money and beautiful women, he cherished his life more. He didn't want to know what Yi Xian was planning because he already knew that even if the other party wasn't a terrorist, he definitely wasn't a good person. If he was really involved, he was afraid that he wouldn't even know how he died. "Do you think you can walk?" Yi Xian said calmly, but it made Sun Xiaofu stop in his tracks. More than 10 men in black had already appeared outside the door. Obviously, it would be more difficult for Sun Xiaofu to leave this place. Looking at the scene in front of him, Sun Xiaofu's body trembled. He turned around and knelt down in front of Yi Xian, crying loudly, "Big brother, I have an 80-year-old mother and a wife to support. Please let me go. TSK, TSK, TSK. Yi Xian slowly shook his head and slowly helped Sun Xiaofu up. With a warm smile on his face, he said, "Little brother, didn't you have a lot of fun with that Japanese stewardess on the plane? As long as you work for me loyally, I can let you play with such a woman every day. You can even have billions of dollars and enjoy the happiness of having multiple wives. Isn't that great?" "No. No. Big brother. I beg you to let me go." Sun Xiaofu's tears flowed down. If he had known that this would be the result, he wouldn't have hit on Yi Xian on the plane even if he was beaten to death. He hated that Japanese stewardess even more. Looking at Sun Xiaofu's tear-stained face, Yi Xian slowly shook his head. A look of pity appeared on his face. He sighed and said, "Since little brother has no intention of helping me, then don't blame me for being heartless." When Yi Xian said this, the warm smile on his face disappeared and his expression became vicious. He said in a cold voice, "Men, take him away. Chop him up and feed him to the dogs." "Yes." More than 10 men in black quickly entered. Without any nonsense, they pulled Sun Xiaofu out like a dead dog. This made the man's face turn pale. He shouted at Yi Xian, "Big brother, spare me, spare me. I promise you, I promise you. Let him go." A slight smile appeared on the corner of Yi Xian's mouth, causing the dozen or so black-clothed men to quickly retreat. Sun Xiaofu, on the other hand, was so scared that his legs went limp. He directly collapsed to the ground and didn't recover for a full 10 breaths of time. Yi Xian walked to Sun Xiaofu and patted his shoulder affectionately. "Little brother, as long as you work for me loyally, I won't mistreat you." "Men, take him down to enjoy the passion of the Japanese beauties," Yi Xian said softly and asked a man in black to help Sun Xiaofu out of the courtyard. It was also at this moment that a middle-aged butler quietly appeared behind Yi Xian. He said with a slightly puzzled expression, "Mr. Yi, this kind of third-rate person is not important at all. No matter what plan you have, we will definitely complete it for you. What's your name?" Yi Xian asked calmly. "I'm Ing Yi, an outer member of the underworld. I'm responsible for gathering information in Japan." The middle-aged butler bowed to Yi Xian. "Humph, gathering information." Yi Xian snorted coldly and said in a cold voice, "If you're really so useful, why didn't you find out that Muramasa Yoshiko went to Jiangnan? Why did you let me personally step into Japan?" Bang! As Yi Xian's words entered his ears, Ing Yi was instantly drenched in cold sweat. He knelt in front of Yi Xian, his body trembling uncontrollably as he said, please punish me, Nether Lord. It's us who are useless." Unfortunately, Yi Xian was unmoved by Ing Yi's apology. This made the man grit his teeth, take out a dagger, and cut his left arm. Fresh blood splattered as the man cut off his arm. A large amount of blood flowed out. Then, he kowtowed to Yi Xian again and said in a trembling voice, "Please forgive me, Nether Lord. I'll definitely make up for my mistakes and not let you down. I'll let it go this time, but remember this. If there's a next time, you'll have to stretch out your neck and end your own life," Yi Xian said calmly. "Yes, I'll take my leave." Ing Yi endured the pain of losing his arm and left. It was obvious that he was lucky to be able to keep his life. In the courtyard, Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and slowly shook his head. He was already dissatisfied with these outer members of the underworld. He wanted elites, not arrogant trash like them. As for Sun Xiaofu, although he seemed to be greedy and lecherous, his words were well organized and he knew all sorts of things about Japan like the back of his hand. This was the talent that Yi Xian wanted, and compared to these outer circle members of the underworld, there was a world of difference. Chapter 169. Chop him up and feed him to the dogs. This simple sentence was filled with ruthless killing intent, causing Sun Xiaofu to wake up from his nightmare once again. He didn't even have the heart to pay attention to the 2 Japanese women who were wrapped around him. The night sky was like a curtain, filled with stars. Sun Xiaofu's expression was complicated. After an hour, a helpless expression appeared on his face. He got off the bed and walked towards the center of the courtyard. In the courtyard, Yi Xian sat cross-legged under the cherry blossom tree. As he breathed, blood-red ribbons surrounded his body, and muffled sounds came from the surrounding void. Suddenly, Yi Xian opened his eyes. A blood-red light flashed across his eyes, and he looked at Sun Xiaofu with a deep gaze. "I understand." "Yes. That's good." The 2 of them had a short conversation, and everything was conveyed without words. To put it bluntly, Sun Xiaofu knew that he had no way out. If he didn't listen to Yi Xian's orders, he would only die. If he helped Yi Xian, he would at least have a chance to live and enjoy the glory and wealth of the human world. Sun Xiaofu understood this principle very well. He appeared here to express his attitude to Yi Xian. "Sir, the officer in charge of the military base in Japan is called Nitaichiro. As long as you control him, you will naturally be able to open the gate of the military base. I have a friend who is reporting under this person and can completely come into contact with Nitaichiro." Chi. Yi Xian casually threw a black gold card to Sun Xiaofu, who quickly received it. Yi Xian's voice slowly sounded at this moment. There are 10 billion in this card. The password is the last 6 digits of the card number. I'll give you 3 days. From Nitaichiro to half of the courtiers in Dongying, you have to bribe them all for your use. Whether it's coercion or killing to establish your authority, I don't care what method you use. I just want to see the results within 3 days. As Yi Xian's voice fell, Sun Xiaofu's lips trembled as he looked at Yi Xian in horror. My lord, don't worry. In a place like Dongying, as long as you have money to clear the way, these things won't be a problem. Sun Xiaofu tried his best to calm himself down and then bowed to Yi Xian. Go. Find me here in 3 days. If you don't complete the mission I gave you, you should know what will happen to you, Yi Xian said calmly. Yes, sir. Sun Xiaofu had a complicated look on his face. He carefully put away the black gold card, then strode out of the flowing water house. Suddenly, Sun Xiaofu stopped in his tracks and looked back at Yi Xian. With a complicated voice, he asked, Sir, aren't you afraid that I'll take the money and leave? You won't. Because you're a smart person. Yi Xian smiled indifferently. He closed his eyes again and went back to cultivating. Sun Xiaofu looked deeply at Yi Xian, then quickly left the place. Yi Xian didn't give him much time. A silent massacre was happening. The originally peaceful capital of Dongying was in an uproar. In the past 3 days, many officials had died in their homes. Dongying was a small country. The mafia ran rampant. In this country, the mafia was a legal organization. As long as you had money, these mafia could be used. Money, beauties, massacres. Under the attack of Sun Xiaofu's huge amount of money, the mafia and samurai families in Dongying were all used by Sun Xiaofu. This caused the capital of Dongying to become chaotic. Sun Xiaofu's actions naturally attracted the attention of the royal family of Dongying. They even started to investigate Sun Xiaofu. However, what the royal family of Dongying didn't know was that in just 3 days, half of the officials in Dongying had been bribed by him. They even helped him suppress the news of the massacre. As for those officials who would rather die than submit, they were all assassinated in their homes. Most importantly, Nitaichiro, the high official in charge of the military base in Japan, had already become brothers with Sun Xiaofu. Every day, he would indulge in sensual pleasures and indulge in the pleasures of women. 3 days wasn't a long time, but it wasn't short either. When the first ray of morning light shone on the flowing water house from the east, Sun Xiaofu appeared in front of Yi Xian, dressed in bright clothes. My lord, I have completed the task you have entrusted me with. Nitaichiro and I have become sworn brothers. What is the next step of my lord's plan? Sun Xiaofu bowed, lowering his posture to the lowest possible level. Very good. You've done well. Yi Xian stood under the cherry blossom tree with a satisfied smile on his face. Go and tell Nitaichiro that you have a friend who wants to visit the military base in Dongying. I don't think he'll reject you, Yi Xian said calmly. Yes, sir. I'll do it right away. Sun Xiaofu was very smart. He didn't ask about Yi Xian's plan because he knew what to ask and what not to ask. This was where he was smart. In an underground military base in the suburbs of Dongying's capital. The steel technology door opened. Nitaichiro was wearing an official's robe and his face was flushed. He was anxiously waiting for Sun Xiaofu's arrival. These days, Nitaichiro could be said to be bursting with joy. This was because he had gotten to know a very rich sugar daddy. Every day, other than inviting him to spend time with beauties from different countries, he also gave him a large amount of money. With this money, even if he retired, it would be enough for him to squander happily for the rest of his life. Of course, for a sugar daddy like Sun Xiaofu, Nitaichiro would grant all of his requests. Today, Sun Xiaofu wanted to bring a friend to visit the military base that he was in charge of. For such a simple request, Nitaichiro naturally agreed to it. Although the Dongying royal family prohibited private individuals from entering the military base, he was the highest-ranking officer here. As long as this matter wasn't leaked, who would know? A black car that was worth tens of millions drove over from afar. After passing through layers of armed checkpoints, it finally stopped in front of the military base's gate. Sun Xiaofu got out of the car first and quickly opened the door. Yi Xian calmly walked out of the car. This made Nita Ichiro stunned. This was because he realized that Sun Xiaofu, this sugar daddy, was extremely respectful to this ordinary-looking young man. It was as if he was this young man's servant. Sun Kun, this is. Nita Ichiro walked over quickly and asked Sun Xiaofu in a slightly stiff Xia language. Sun Kun, this is my boss, Mr. Liu. He is an extremely famous and wealthy businessman in Xia country. He has always admired your reputation and has specially come to meet you today, Sun Xiaofu said with a smile. Hearing Sun Xiaofu's introduction, Nita Ichiro was stunned. He looked at Yi Xian with a slightly strange gaze. One must know that the people of Xia country were very sensitive among the upper echelons of Dongying. The reason why he could befriend Sun Xiaofu was because he had investigated Sun Xiaofu's background and knew that this person had been in Dongying for many years. As for the origin of Sun Xiaofu's money, Nita Ichiro had never figured it out. But now, it seemed that Sun Xiaofu's money was related to this Xia country businessman. After figuring out the crux of the matter, Nita Ichiro smiled. He wasn't afraid that Yi Xian was a spy from Xia country. After all, there were only two of them. It was simply impossible for them to cause any trouble in the military base that he was in charge of. Chapter 170. Hi, welcome, Mr. Liu. Nita Ichiro bowed and looked at Yi Xian as if he was looking at a mountain of gold. I've long heard that Japan's military is powerful, and I've always wanted to see it for myself. Please lead the way, Mr. Nita. Yi Xian had an extraordinary bearing and had the aura of a superior, so Nita Ichiro did not dare to underestimate him. He even invited the two of them into the military base. Along the way, he constantly complimented Yi Xian, and Yi Xian nodded slightly in response. Japan's military base. It was heavily guarded, and there were layers upon layers of checkpoints. Here, one could see the most advanced equipment, all kinds of colorful technological weapons, and researchers in white coats. There were also fully armed Japanese soldiers who walked past them from time to time. A steel technology gate came into view in front of Yi Xian. After Nita Ichiro entered the password, the steel gate rumbled open. Mr. Liu, this is the command room, and also the most important place in our military base. All military orders are transmitted from here. There were sophisticated electronic instruments, a large number of surveillance cameras, and many researchers walking back and forth. This was the scene that Yi Xian saw. When Yi Xian saw a super large instrument, his eyes lit up, and he slowly walked toward the instrument. What is this for? Yi Xian stroked the instrument in front of him and asked in a puzzled voice. Looking at this scene, Nita Ichiro's expression changed. He quickly went forward and said, Mr. Liu, you can just look at this. Please don't touch it. Oh. This is our country's air defense combat system. It is also the most important part of this military base. Whether it is intercepting other countries' missiles or launching intercontinental missiles, it is all operated by this instrument, Nita Ichiro quickly explained. Intercontinental missiles. Yi Xian muttered to himself, then looked at Nita Ichiro strangely and said, so, as long as this instrument is activated, it can directly launch intercontinental missiles at other countries. Looking at Yi Xian's smile, Nita Ichiro was stunned. A faint sense of uneasiness rose from the bottom of his heart. He looked at Yi Xian with a slightly puzzled expression and said, that is true, but it is impossible for such a thing to happen. If we launch intercontinental missiles at other countries, it is simply provoking a war between countries. Even the emperor cannot bear such a crime. Ha! Suddenly, Yi Xian laughed out loud, as if he had found something extremely interesting. This also made Nitaichiro and Sun Xiaofu stunned. They did not know why Yi Xian was laughing. "Mr. Nitaichiro," Yi Xian said, playfully. "Of course. I would like to see if the air defense combat system is really as powerful as you said." "Huh? Mr. Liu. You really know how to joke." Nitaichiro forced a smile, but his eyes were already filled with vigilance when he looked at Yi Xian. A large number of soldiers quickly gathered behind him, and the guns in their hands were vaguely aimed at Yi Xian. "Mr. Nitaichiro, do you think I am joking?" Yi Xian's smile disappeared. His voice gradually turned cold, and a trace of brutality flashed across his eyes. "Who are you?" At this point, if Nitaichiro still thought that Yi Xian was a businessman from the Xia kingdom, even he would have to scold himself for being an idiot. Looking at the other party's posture, it was obvious that he did not come with good intentions. "Who I am is not important. What is important is that I am very interested in intercontinental missiles, and I also want to test the power of this weapon." Yi Xian slowly walked towards Nitaichiro. "Capture him for me," Nitaichiro said in a gloomy voice. He could already tell that Yi Xian did not come with good intentions, so he directly gave the order to the soldiers behind him. Pfft! Blood splattered everywhere, and heads fell to the ground. Without waiting for the soldiers to step forward, Yi Xian used his fingers as a sword and directly beheaded all of them on the ground. This made Nitaichiro's expression change greatly, and he staggered back. Buzz! Yi Xian took a step forward and suddenly appeared in front of Nitaichiro, lifting him into the air. A cruel and cold smile appeared on Yi Xian's lips. "I am a very reasonable person. As long as you activate this device, I will naturally not harm your life. But if you don't listen, then don't blame me for being merciless." Yi Xian's 5 fingers slightly tightened, causing Nitaichiro's face to turn purple. He kept struggling in Yi Xian's hands, and many of the researchers present turned pale. They hid in the corner and did not dare to make a sound. Let go. I promise you," Nitaichiro said in a trembling voice. This also made Yi Xian release him. Huff. 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 Nitaichiro collapsed on the ground, panting heavily. He looked at Yi Xian with an extremely gloomy expression, but he quickly got up and went to the device according to Yi Xian's instructions. Pa! Suddenly, Nitaichiro quickly pressed a red button, and the entire military base suddenly emitted an ear-piercing alarm. The steel door of the command room suddenly fell down, completely isolating the entire place from the outside world. "Damned warrior from the state of Great Xia, our people will be here soon. You definitely can't escape." At this moment, Nitaichiro's face was ferocious. The glaring red alarm around him seemed to have given him great confidence. "You are really courting death," Yi Xian said in a gloomy voice. A bloody light shot out from his sword fingers and directly cut off Nitaichiro's left arm. The spurting blood was extremely terrifying, causing him to howl miserably. "Pig from the state of Great Xia, you won't be able to activate this device. Kill me if you can. But let me tell you, you won't be able to walk out of here today. The only outcome for you is death." Nitaichiro held onto the wound on his severed arm and roared loudly. His eyes were filled with viciousness. It wasn't that he wasn't afraid of death, but if he really did as Yi Xian said and activated the anti-air combat system, the Emperor of Japan would probably cut him into pieces. Looking at Nitaichiro's unyielding expression, Yi Xian smiled coldly. If it was any other time, even if the other party's will was made of iron, Yi Xian would be able to make him submit obediently. But now, Yi Xian didn't have time to deal with this person because he wanted to play a game. This game would shock the entire world, and it would also be a great lesson for Yi Xian to teach the Japanese. Yi Xian looked around at the many researchers present, and his cold voice sounded out at this moment. Everyone, I'm a very reasonable person. If anyone can help me activate this device, I naturally won't hurt them. But if any of you don't know what's good for you, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Unfortunately, Yi Xian's threat didn't have any effect. The researchers present were dead silent. Obviously, helping Yi Xian activate the device was purely an act of seeking death. You guys have really disappointed me. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. When he slashed out with his sword, one of the researchers died on the spot, causing the rest of the people to scream. I'll only give you 10 breaths of time to consider. After 10 breaths, if you still don't activate this device, then all of you will die here. Yi Xian said coldly, causing the faces of the researchers present to turn pale. 1, 2, 3, the countdown to death began. As Yi Xian's calm voice rang out, many of the researchers trembled. Everyone's faces were filled with hesitation and struggle. Chapter 171. Time's up. It seems like you guys aren't afraid of death. Yi Xian smiled sinisterly. His palms were glowing, and the air around him was exploding. It was as if he was going to kill all the researchers in the next moment. Sir, it's not that we don't want to help you, but the key to activate this instrument is in Nitaichiro's hands. Suddenly, a middle-aged researcher spoke with a trembling voice. It was obvious that he had finally collapsed under the pressure of death. With this person taking the lead, the rest of the researchers expressed their stance toward Yi Xian. You damned bastards. Nitaichiro's face was ashen. His lips were trembling as he shouted angrily at the researchers present. Yi Xian waved his hand and the key hidden in Nitaichiro's chest was sucked into Yi Xian's hand. Then, Yi Xian tossed the key to the middle-aged researcher. Activate this instrument right now, Yi Xian said coldly. Yes. Yes. The middle-aged researcher did not dare to delay. He hurriedly got everyone to stand up and gather in front of the super instrument. As the key was inserted into the groove, the instrument immediately started operating and emitted a slightly dazzling light. You bastards, you're committing treason. You'll definitely be sentenced to death by the Emperor, Nitaichiro roared angrily. I don't know if they'll die or not, but I know that you're going to die now. Yi Xian smiled coldly. Since Nitaichiro was no longer of any use, his only fate was death. A blood-red light was flung out from Yi Xian's hand. Nitaichiro's eyes were wide open as he turned into a headless corpse. He no longer had any signs of life. This caused the researchers to tremble. They sped up the activation of the instrument. Activating air defense combat system. Activating surface-to-air missiles. Intercontinental missiles are ready. The system's cold voice sounded. However, when Yi Xian heard it, his smile became even wider. However, a trace of cruelty flashed across his eyes. Prepare to launch the intercontinental missiles. Target the Western powers. Yi Xian placed his hands behind his back and spoke in a calm voice. My lord. No. No. This will cause a war between our country and the Western countries. Hearing Yi Xian's order, the faces of the researchers changed drastically. They looked at Yi Xian as if they were looking at a lunatic. At this moment, Sun Xiaofu's face was pale. He quickly walked in front of Yi Xian and said with a trembling voice, My lord, you must not do this. This will cause chaos in the world. The Japanese will definitely not let us off. Ha! Yi Xian sneered again and again. His voice was cruel as he said, This game has just begun. You can wait and see who won't let go of who. Fire. Yi Xian said coldly. His eyes flashed with killing intent as he looked at the researchers present. It was obvious that if these people did not do as he said, they would end up in a horrible state. My lord, you must not do this. The middle-aged researcher trembled as he refused. He knew very well what would happen if he pressed the purple button in front of him. Crack. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. Yi Xian brutally broke the man's neck, causing the rest of the researchers to scream in horror. Do as I say. Otherwise, you will end up like him. Yi Xian looked at the rest of the researchers coldly. A great fear of life and death swept over them. Target locked, 45 degrees north latitude. Sufficient fuel. The intercontinental missiles are ready and ready to launch. Fire. Pa. Yi Xian's face was ferocious. When his low voice sounded, a researcher pressed the purple button with trembling hands. An extremely terrifying scene appeared. Outside the military base. The earth was shaking. The intercontinental missile launch pads were operating. Terrifying flames burned at the tail of the intercontinental missiles. Then, a loud explosion sounded. 10 intercontinental missiles soared into the sky. The blazing and terrifying flames broke through the sound barrier and shot toward the Western countries. At the same time, in the Western countries, the Air Defense Department was issuing an ear-piercing alarm. Sir, an intercontinental missile has broken through the East China Sea's airspace and is heading toward our country. The Western researchers were trembling and screaming. A white man was as pale as a sheet. He quickly picked up the walkie-talkie and roared, "Activate the SSS-grade air defense system and launch the A-02 annihilation missile immediately. We must stop the intercontinental missiles from entering our country's territory." The Western countries were the first to discover the incoming intercontinental missiles. They all entered a state of readiness. All kinds of air defense systems were activated rapidly. A large number of air defense missiles were launched. Obviously, they were trying to prevent this disaster from happening. Dongying, military base. Yi Xian put his hands behind his back and calmly looked at the satellite screen in front of him. Many researchers were lying on the ground as if they had lost their souls. This was because they knew that when the intercontinental missiles headed west, they would be the biggest sinners in Dongying. Even if they did not die today, there would be no place for them in Dongying. "My lord, are you crazy?" At this time, Sun Xiaofu was already lying on the ground. His voice was trembling. He had never thought that Yi Xian would be so crazy. This wasn't a terrorist attack, but a world war. If the Western countries found out about this, not to mention whether or not the Western countries would forgive Yi Xian, just the anger of the Japanese would be something that Yi Xian wouldn't be able to withstand. "How dare you!" There was a loud explosion and an angry roar. 100-meter long blade aura broke the iron door and an old man with silver hair rushed in. The terrifying earth energy around him buzzed and exploded. His eyes were filled with terrifying murderous intent as he looked at Yi Xian. "Who are you? How dare you invade the Dongying military base and commit such a heinous crime?" As the old man roared, countless Dongying warriors and soldiers surrounded the place. The black muzzles were pointed at Yi Xian as if they would shoot him into a sieve at any time. "Who are you?" Yi Xian smiled and said. "The martial god of Dongying, Yamamoto Kazuto." The old man's hair and beard were fluttering as the earth energy around him exploded. The long blade in his hand emitted a cold blade aura and an extremely terrifying aura had already locked onto Yi Xian. "My lord, he is the most powerful man in Dongying. You must be careful," Sun Xiaofu warned. Sun Xiaofu shouted as his pupils constricted. The old man in front of him was the martial god of Japan. Legend had it that he had already reached the Khanate level. Other than being defeated by Wu Juexian, he had never been defeated in his life. He was revered by the Japanese. Martial god. The most powerful man in Dongying. Yi Xian looked at Yamamoto Kazuto indifferently and said coldly, "You can die now." Boom. His palm was like the sky, suppressing everything. Yi Xian's body emitted a blood-red light. He slowly raised his right hand and when he slapped out, the void collapsed and was annihilated. Chapter 172. Bang! His body exploded and blood rained down. The so-called number one expert of Japan couldn't even withstand a single palm from Yi Xian. He turned into a pool of blood and fell to the ground. When this scene appeared before Sun Xiaofu's eyes, he was completely dumbfounded on the spot. He looked at Yi Xian with an expression of shock that he'd never had before. Mr. Yamamoto. Many Japanese martial artists shouted in horror. They couldn't believe that the number one expert of Japan would die here. Open fire. Bang! 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 The black muzzles shot out terrifying tongues of fire. The roar of the bullets was deafening, drowning Yi Xian in an instant. When they ran out of ammunition and food, the space gradually quieted down. However, the smell of burning in the air was extremely strong. Is he dead? A soldier said with a trembling voice. Quick! Look! Suddenly, someone cried out in fear, causing many of the Japanese soldiers to look in Yi Xian's direction. However, the following scene caused them to be completely stunned on the spot. There were even people who were fleeing. A misty bloody light covered Yi Xian's body. Countless bullets froze in the air. A cold smile appeared on his face. Buzz! The air trembled as the bullets were deflected. The terrifying sound of the bullets whistling through the air caused these Japanese to be riddled with holes. Their bodies shattered as large amounts of blood mist splattered out. All of them turned into ice-cold corpses that fell to the ground, not a single one of them was left alive. Killing all of them, not leaving a single one alive. This was Yi Xian's way of doing things. After all, he came to Japan to kill, not to sightsee. What a bunch of ignorant people. Yi Xian slowly shook his head and walked out. Sun Xiaofu's face was flushed red. He quickly chased after Yi Xian and asked in a trembling voice, "Sir, where are we going?" Japan's Emperor's Pavilion. As Yi Xian's voice fell, Sun Xiaofu was stunned. Hesitation appeared in his eyes, but he still gritted his teeth and followed closely behind Yi Xian. The two of them disappeared from the military base. Japan, Emperor Pavilion. The Japanese emperor's face was purple and he was roaring at the officials. "You bunch of trash! How dare you let people sneak into our military base and launch intercontinental missiles toward the west? Do you know what the consequences will be? Your Majesty, please calm down. Mr. Yamamoto has already gone to capture this person. He will definitely capture this murderer. When the time comes, we will naturally be able to give the Western countries an explanation," a courtier said in a trembling voice. Bang! Suddenly, the Emperor of Japan kicked the courtier to the ground. He took out a samurai sword and chopped off the courtier's head. A large amount of blood splattered all over the Emperor of Japan, but he didn't feel anything. Explain. How are we going to explain this? Right now, the Western countries have already sent out their battleships and are sending troops towards Japan. They have even declared war on the international stage. Do you bunch of trash know about this? The Emperor of Japan was completely enraged. His face was ferocious and distorted. He kept pacing around the Emperor Pavilion, causing the officials present to tremble. They were deeply afraid that the Emperor of Japan would kill them one by one in his extreme rage. "I don't care who did this. I will definitely kill him," the Emperor of Japan roared. From this, it could be seen how furious he was. Bang! 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 Suddenly, just as the officials were trembling and the Emperor of Japan was bellowing furiously, a large number of agonizing cries rang out from outside the Emperor's pavilion, accompanied by deafening battle cries. What happened outside? The Emperor of Japan's expression changed and an extremely bad feeling rose in his heart. Buzz! Blood light covered the sky and a vicious aura filled the air. The shouts outside completely stopped. The entire Emperor Pavilion seemed to have fallen into hell, giving off a deathly silence. A slender figure was strolling into the Heavenly Emperor Pavilion. As this person appeared, the temperature of the entire Heavenly Emperor Pavilion instantly dropped to freezing point. An extremely terrifying pressure pressed down on the minds of the Emperor of Japan and the others like a huge mountain. Yi Xian was dressed in black. His black hair was draped behind his head. He held the Muramasa demon blade in his hand and was slowly walking towards the Emperor of Japan. The corners of his mouth were curled up into a smile, but it made people feel extremely terrified when they looked at him. Dong! 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 It was as if the Song of the Dead was playing, as if the war drums were beating. With every step Yi Xian took, the Emperor of Japan subconsciously retreated. He looked at Yi Xian with a hint of fear in his eyes. How dare you? Who are you? How dare you barge into the Emperor Pavilion? When the Emperor of Japan could no longer retreat, he suddenly came to his senses. He questioned Yi Xian with a face full of shame and anger. Pa! A resounding slap sounded out. The Emperor of Japan didn't even see how Yi Xian attacked. His entire body was sent flying, and the crown on his head fell to the ground. A bright red palm print clearly appeared on his face. Such a scene caused the officials present to fall silent. The Emperor of Japan also seemed to have been beaten silly. He covered his face in a daze and didn't come back to his senses for a long time. At this moment, Yi Xian arrived in front of the Emperor's throne. Under the stunned gazes of the officials and the Emperor of Japan, Yi Xian slowly sat down. It was also at this moment that Yi Xian's body emitted a misty light. As the light gradually dissipated, his original appearance appeared before the eyes of the Emperor of Japan and the others. Yi Xian. When the Emperor of Japan saw Yi Xian's appearance clearly, he cried out in shock. He had never expected that the enemy he had been wary of would appear before him. Moreover, he was sitting on his throne and looking down on him. He's holding the Muramasa demon blade. An official said with a trembling voice, causing the officials to burst into an uproar. That's right, that's right. It must be the military base that you sneaked into and fired the intercontinental missile toward the west. The Emperor of Japan wasn't stupid. However, he instantly understood what had happened. This made his face turn red as he roared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, how dare you do such a crazy thing? Aren't you afraid of incurring the wrath of the Western countries? The Emperor of Japan reprimanded loudly. Ha! Yi Xian smiled. He really smiled. However, his smile was extremely sinister. He looked at the Emperor of Japan as if he was looking at an idiot. I don't know if I should call you stupid or ignorant. Even if you tell the Western countries that this was done by me, Yi Xian, do you think they will believe you? Yi Xian said contemptuously. The Emperor of Japan gritted his teeth. Just as Yi Xian said, the intercontinental missile was fired from Japan. This was an irrefutable fact. Even if he tried his best to clarify to the Western countries, how could they believe him? At this moment, the Western countries had already declared war. A large number of aircraft carriers and battleships were heading toward Japan. A war between countries was unavoidable. You damned bastard! The Emperor of Japan roared with hatred. If looks could kill, he would have cut Yi Xian into pieces. Even that wouldn't be enough to ease the hatred in his heart. Chapter 173. Death wasn't scary. What was scary was living a life worse than death. If Yi Xian wanted to kill the Emperor of Japan, he would have died thousands of times. However, Yi Xian didn't want to do that because he wanted to let all the Japanese know the consequences of offending him. Yi Xian. The Muramasa demon blade is said to be your country's protective divine weapon. Today, I'm here to return it. I hope that your majesty will keep it well. Crack. A crisp sound of metal was heard. The Muramasa demon blade, which was invincible in the eyes of the Japanese, was broken into two by Yi Xian and casually thrown in front of the Emperor of Japan. The Emperor of Japan's face turned ashen as he looked at Yi Xian with extreme hatred. Good, good, good. Mr. Yi is indeed capable. I will remember today's kindness. I just hope that Mr. Yi won't regret it. The Emperor of Japan suddenly laughed. He laughed very happily and even bowed to Yi Xian. In my dictionary, the word regret doesn't exist. When the Western countries attack Japan, I want to see if you can still laugh. Yi Xian smiled slightly and stood up to walk out of the Emperor Pavilion. Protect His Majesty. Suddenly, a large number of Japanese warriors charged into the Sky Emperor Pavilion, and countless soldiers surrounded the Sky Emperor Pavilion. However, everyone looked at Yi Xian with a trace of fear in their eyes. Obviously, Yi Xian's title as the #1 expert in the East wasn't just for show. It was a symbol of extreme strength and had a great deterrent effect on these people. A bunch of trash. Can you stop, Mr. Yi? Why aren't you all backing down? The Emperor of Japan suppressed his monstrous anger as he looked at the numerous Japanese martial artists with malicious eyes. This caused them to feel ashamed, but they still made way for Yi Xian to walk towards the outside world. Your Majesty, are we just going to let this matter go? A courtier said unwillingly. Ha! Looking at Yi Xian's back view, the Emperor of Japan smiled bitterly and said in a malicious voice, there's an old saying in Xia country that goes, when an ordinary man is angry, blood splatters 5 steps away. Within 10 steps, everyone is an enemy of a country. Even if I have the power of a country, I'm just an ant in front of him. If he wanted to kill me just now, which one of you could stop him? As the Emperor of Japan's voice fell, the courtiers present fell silent. Their faces were extremely pale because this was the truth. Your Majesty, Yi Xian. Of the Western countries' warships. The Western. The Emperor of Japan took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. He said in a deep voice, Japan is in trouble. It's all my fault. I will bear all the responsibility. The Emperor of Japan was in charge of a country. He was definitely not a mediocre person. In this moment of the country's rise and fall, he showed the magnanimity of an emperor. Everyone, please follow me to the East China Sea. I will personally apologize to the Western countries. The Emperor of Japan's expression was calm, but there was a flash of humiliation in his eyes. He only wanted Japan to survive this. No matter what price he had to pay, he would not hesitate. In the outside world, the people of Japan were in a state of panic. All the major television stations were constantly broadcasting emergency news. When the Japanese found out the truth, they cursed the Emperor of Japan for being incompetent. Most of the Japanese were in a state of panic because of the declaration of war by the Western countries. They were afraid that once the war started, Japan would be attacked by the flames of war. Above the sky, in the void. Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the sky, calmly looking down at the East China Sea. He was looking into the distance. Countless Western battleships were rushing over. The missiles on the battleships were already set up. It was as if they would turn the small country in front of them into dust at any moment. A slight smile appeared on Yi Xian's face. This was what he wanted to see. Although Yi Xian had the ability to destroy Japan, he did not want to become the enemy of the entire world. Using the Western countries to destroy Japan was the best outcome. Above the East China Sea, the Western battleships were heading towards Japan's port. The Japanese battleships were also preparing for war. A huge battle was about to erupt in the East China Sea. Surface-to-air missiles are ready. Ready to fire. A-01 annihilation missiles are in position. Ready to fire. An ear-piercing alarm rang out in Japan's port. A large number of Japanese battleships entered battle mode. A Japanese general stood on a battleship, cold sweat rolling down his forehead. He was ready to give the order to fire at the Western battleships. "General, His Majesty has ordered us to raise the white flag and surrender to the Western countries." A soldier quickly walked over and read out the Emperor's order. "What?" The Japanese general's expression changed. He simply could not believe his ears. Only when the soldier repeated the Emperor's order did the general come back to his senses. He could only helplessly follow the Emperor's orders. Woo woo woo. The horns of the battleships sounded out. This was the signal of surrender. A large number of white flags were raised on the Japanese battleships, and the Western countries' battleships quickly headed towards Japan's port. In front of Japan's port, the Emperor of Japan held the letter of credence and knelt on the ground in humiliation. When the Western battleships stopped in front of the port, countless white soldiers surrounded the port. Numerous Western generals stepped onto the port and walked towards the Emperor of Japan. High in the sky, Yi Xian frowned as he looked at this scene. A dark light flashed in his eyes. This was different from what he had expected. The war had not started at all, and this was not the result he wanted. At the same time, Japan used a global broadcast to announce that they had surrendered. They also expressed their sincerest apologies to the Western countries. In this announcement, the Emperor of Japan knelt and kowtowed, expressing that he was willing to give up land and pay compensation to make up for the losses he had caused to the Western countries. In this announcement, the Emperor of Japan repeatedly emphasized that the intercontinental missile attack was not done by the Japanese. Instead, it was done by the #1 expert of the East, Yi Xian, who had snuck into the Japanese military base and committed such a heinous crime. It was also at that moment that the Xia Ministry of Foreign Affairs strongly condemned the Emperor of Japan's words. In the end, the Emperor of Japan once again kowtowed and apologized. He also signed a large number of unfair treaties with the Western countries' ambassadors. Giving up land, paying huge amounts of compensation, and allowing the Western countries' troops to be stationed on Japan's territory. The originally powerful Japan's economy had regressed by 20 years, and it had taken an unimaginable blow. Chapter 174. However, Yi Xian's name caused the Western countries to be wary. After all, the Westerners weren't stupid. Japan had always been on good terms with the Western countries. How would they dare to use intercontinental missiles? However, Japan didn't have any strong evidence to prove that Yi Xian was the one who did it. Moreover, Japan had already ceded their land and paid compensation. This matter was temporarily suppressed by the Western countries. Japan, Emperor Pavilion. The Emperor of Japan, Miyamoto Takeda, was holding 2 broken pieces of the Muramasa demon blade in his hand. He sat on the ground in a daze. He didn't even feel the blade cutting into his palm. The Emperor of Japan knelt down and apologized in a global broadcast. He even signed a series of unequal treaties in humiliation. This was something that had never happened in the history of Japan. I, Miyamoto Takeda, am a sinner of Japan. But if I don't surrender, how can Japan be a match for the Western countries? The Emperor of Japan murmured with a bitter smile. Tears of humiliation flowed out of his eyes, wetting his clothes. Do you want to take revenge? Do you want to kill Yi Xian? Suddenly, a deep and gloomy voice rang out, causing the Emperor of Japan to be stunned. Then, he roared, Who is speaking? Get the hell out here. Buzz. The 2 broken pieces of the Muramasa demon blade were emitting a dark light. A black shadow floated out of the broken blade, causing the entire Emperor Pavilion to fall into an eerie and terrifying environment. Miyamoto Takeda was stunned on the ground. You. Who are you? Facing such a strange scene, Miyamoto Takeda asked in shock. You don't need to know who I am. You just need to remember that I'm someone who can help you. The black shadow's aura was cold. Even his voice was emotionless. How can you help me? Miyamoto Takeda tried his best to calm himself down. He could feel that the sudden appearance of the shadow would bring him an unimaginable opportunity. Open the door of the spirit-branded retainer and take back the Kusanagi sword. You will obtain the power to destroy the world. Even if Yi Xian is an immortal cultivator, he won't be a match for you under the Kusanagi sword, the black shadow said coldly. Immortal. Immortal cultivator. Miyamoto Takeo muttered to himself in shock. Then, he suddenly looked at the black shadow and said, how is this possible? Are there really cultivators in this world? In the distant past, immortal cultivators were real. Until the end of the age of Dharma and spiritual Qi, a large number of immortal cultivators died of old age. This Yi Xian found another way to devour the endless Qi of blood and achieved supreme cultivation. However, he killed too many people. Sooner or later, he will suffer the immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens. When the time comes, he will definitely die. The black shadow spoke slowly, as if it had a deep understanding of the Tao of immortality. No, I want to kill him with my own hands. Miyamoto Takeda's body trembled as he growled. Give up your throne. Follow my instructions and open the door to the spirit-branded retainer. When you reappear in this world, with the power bestowed upon you by the heavenly sword of clouds, killing him will be as easy as flipping your hand. The black shadow spoke coldly. On this day, a piece of news that shook the entire world spread. The Japanese Emperor Miyamoto Takeda had mysteriously disappeared from the Emperor Pavilion. He only left behind an order to pass his throne to his son. No one could find him. Drifting Cloud Villa. Yi Xian's expression was gloomy as he sat cross-legged under the cherry blossom tree. Sun Xiaofu stood beside him, trembling slightly. He could feel that Yi Xian was in a very bad mood. My lord, the Japanese emperor has given up his throne and disappeared without a trace. The entire Japan is in chaos. You should have achieved your goal, right? Sun Xiaofu probed. You're wrong. It's not over yet. Yi Xian stood up from under the cherry blossom tree. He looked into the endless sky, and a vicious glint flashed across his eyes. Yi Xian was a person who would repay kindness. If he had a grudge, he would not be kind. Although Japan was now riddled with holes, with the passage of time, Japan's national strength would recover one day. When doing things, one had to be ruthless. When killing someone, one had to be ruthless. Letting the Japanese off so easily was not Yi Xian's style. Above the East Sea, jade waves churned as Yi Xian stood on the surface of the sea. His face was expressionless, but his entire body was emitting an extremely terrifying evil aura, causing the surface of the sea beneath him to churn violently. Yi Xian, as an immortal cultivator and a tribulation cultivator, naturally knew the spell of summoning wind and rain. Since the Western countries did not declare war on Japan, he could only do it himself. Wind, rise. Woo woo woo. Yi Xian drew a circle with his palms, and blood-red runes rolled around his body. A terrifying wind suddenly blew between heaven and earth, causing the East Sea to churn violently. Rain, come. Crack. The world was dark, and black clouds covered the sky. Above the endless sky, terrifying lightning crisscrossed in the dark clouds. The azure lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the world as if it was daytime. Whoosh whoosh, the heavy rain poured down violently, and monstrous waves swept across the sky. Amidst the sky-churning waves, Yi Xian was surrounded by blood-red light. The Tongtian's black hair danced in the wind and waves. He seemed to have transformed into a demon god, stirring up the endless wind and clouds, wanting to create an unprecedented disaster. Boundless heaven and earth, borrow the power of the universe. The Tongtian moved the earth and shook the universe. Yi Xian's cruel voice sounded in all directions. His palms gathered the power of the wind and clouds, causing the water of the East Sea to stir up huge waves that swept towards the Japanese port. Rumble. The seawater churned, and the waves were vast. The waves instantly drowned the Japanese port, and the warships docked at the port were turned into debris. There were also a large number of cries coming from the port. Cries, screams, and pleas to the heavens rang out. When the desperate cries of the Japanese rang out, Yi Xian's expression was calm, and he did not show any mercy. His palms slapped out blood-red runes that filled the sky, causing the waves in the East Sea to surge even more violently. Cities were drowned one after another, and tens of thousands of living beings were crying. The sound that gathered together was extremely miserable. Faced with this unprecedented disaster, the Japanese were unable to resist at all. In a mysterious space, a 3-foot-long sword floated in the void, releasing a terrifying spiritual light. Miyamoto Take 10 sat cross-legged. His face was ferocious and distorted. The 3-foot-long sword floating above his head was channeling an extremely terrifying power into his head. He felt as if his body was about to explode, making him want to cry out in pain. The Kusanagi sword was refined by the legendary Immortal God. It contains unimaginable power. If you want to gain the recognition of this sword, you have to rely on your own willpower to survive this calamity. Teacher. I see my people crying. They are being drowned by the tsunami. My people are dying. Please help them. Chapter 175. The power of the Kusanagi sword was extremely terrifying. It also allowed Takashi Miyamoto to see the outside world. He also saw the extremely terrifying tsunami that was constantly drowning the cities. He was enduring extreme pain as he pleaded with the Black Shadow. My child, you must remember this blood feud because this tsunami was caused by Yi Xian. You can't save them now. As long as you can withstand the power of the Kusanagi sword, you can avenge your people. The Black Shadow roared, causing Takashi Miyamoto's face to twist. He let out a violent roar, and the Kusanagi sword above his head shone brightly. An extremely terrifying power was injected into Takashi Miyamoto's body. Yi Xian, even if my soul is destroyed and I can never reincarnate, I, Takashi Miyamoto, will eat your flesh and drink your blood. The veins on Takashi Miyamoto's body wriggled like maggots. His body was shattering and regenerating continuously. A large amount of blood soaked his body. At a glance, Takashi Miyamoto was as terrifying as an evil spirit that had crawled out of hell. A terrifying tsunami drowned the capital of Japan. Countless Japanese were killed in this tsunami. A large number of buildings collapsed, and there was not a single place in the capital of Japan that was unscathed. The country was no longer a country, and the refugees were displaced. The incompetence of the Japanese royal family had completely angered the Japanese. They overthrew the Japanese royal family, and some powerful generals even declared independence. Power was something that drove people crazy. All the generals in Japan who had a large number of troops wanted to become the new ruler of this country. A civil war also started after the tsunami disaster. Artillery fire filled the sky, and the war started. The warlords in various places fought with each other. There were also blood-soul mutated beasts lurking in Japan, constantly turning the Japanese into food and devouring them. This was the last straw that broke the camel's back. The entire country of Japan could not bear the burden. At the same time, a terrifying beast tide broke out all over the world. Countless mutated beasts broke into cities and turned a large number of humans into food. There were also strange blood souls wandering around, cruelly killing humans to improve their cultivation. This was an unprecedented calamity. All the blood soul mutated beasts went completely crazy. They no longer held back, and humans retreated to the cities to resist. The so-called ancient martial ability users were defeated again and again under the full power of the blood-soul mutated beasts. They were even slaughtered and devoured by some terrifying blood souls. Finally, a piece of news that broke the hearts of humans all over the world. In the west, a small country with a territory of only 300,000 square kilometers was completely destroyed by 100,000 mutated beasts. These blood-soul mutated beasts were no less intelligent than humans. They even reared the humans in this country for them to slaughter and devoured. Their cruel actions. Not only was the West suffering from a calamity, but the countries in the East were also suffering from an unprecedented calamity. As for the Xia country, because of its large population, it attracted a large number of beast hordes. It was unknown how many cities and towns were destroyed, and a large number of humans died tragically in this calamity. Finally, when humans could no longer resist the blood-soul mutated beasts, humans all over the world could no longer sit still. Led by the American Eagle Empire in the West, a nuclear bomb was finally launched. The terrifying mushroom cloud destroyed everything. A city occupied by the blood-soul mutated beasts was turned into dust by the nuclear bomb. The use of nuclear weapons slowed down the blood-soul mutated beasts' attack. However, the slaughter was not over. When the blood-soul mutated beasts, who were no less intelligent than humans, realized the terror of nuclear weapons, they scattered and sneaked into human cities to start a massacre. This also made the Western Empire not dare to use nuclear weapons, because it would also cause humans to die tragically under the nuclear bomb. In the Vatican in the West, holy light illuminated the land. Groups of ancient paladins walked out of the Vatican. They claimed to be the servants of God. They held golden holy spears in their hands and fought the blood-soul mutated beasts in the West. In the Sorcerer Alliance, the legendary sorcerers had finally appeared. They displayed their miraculous abilities and wandered around the Western countries, reading out the sorcerer's profoundness. They also displayed their powerful spells to help the humans resist this catastrophe. In the East, in the divine land of the Great Xia, all the cities were under level 1 martial law. All kinds of high-tech weapons were used to defend every city. A large number of city walls were quickly built. The Great Xia soldiers were stationed around the cities day and night, but a large number of cities were still massacred by the blood-soul mutated beasts. Even though the Great Xia also had nuclear weapons in hand, they could not use them directly like the American Eagle Empire. This was because the Great Xia's population was too large. Using nuclear weapons would cause an immeasurable disaster. Jixia Academy, Lesser Thunder Temple, Taoist Mount Longhu, Maoshan sect, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, these three ancient forces finally began to show their power. They walked on the Great Xia's land and kept fighting the blood-soul mutated beasts. In the distant past, the spirit qi of heaven and earth was abundant. These sects were all founded by immortal cultivators. However, in the current era, the spirit qi did not exist in the world. Every time they used spells, they would consume their own vitality and lifespan. This was just an act of drinking poison to quench one's thirst. Humans all over the world struggled to defend their cities. Outside the cities was the blood-soul mutated beasts world. Just as the humans of the world were in despair, a piece of shocking news spread. A moon god sect had appeared in the West. It had 100,000 followers and each of them had incredible power. Its leader called herself the Moon God. She announced to the world through a global live broadcast that she was a living god. Anyone who believed in her would be protected by her. Moon God City. It was a new human city with a moon god overseeing it. What shocked the humans of the world the most was that the blood-soul mutated beasts avoided the Moon God City. It was as if they were afraid of this mysterious moon god. The humans of the West were in an uproar. They all rushed to the Moon God City because they would not be killed by the blood-soul mutated beasts as long as they entered the city. This also made the Moon God City a holy land for the West. However, this was not the end. Other than the Moon God City, mysterious forces rose up in the West. They took over a large number of cities. They called themselves the living gods and said that anyone who believed in them would be protected by them. In the east, in the northwest of the Great Xia country, a man who called himself the brilliant sun immortal spirit appeared out of nowhere. No one could see his face clearly because his body was emitting the light of the sun. The so-called blood soul beasts were all turned into ashes under his light. This person even built the brilliant sun city, which attracted a large number of humans to join him. The world's view of the world was collapsing and a new order was being established. When the so-called gods appeared, the humans of the world were in an uproar. They all became the faithful followers of these gods. The Sun Glory City was only one of them. In the East, countless mysterious figures had built cities and passed down the cultivation methods that humans yearned for. They also gave humans hope. Chapter 176. Xia Country, Jiangnan City. City walls rose from the ground and a large number of high-tech weapons were placed on the city walls. A large number of blood fiends were swarming towards Jiangnan City. Blood souls were laughing eerily in the sky. Open fire. The sound of cannon fire and battle cries were endless. How dare you, evil creatures! Even if I die today, I will make sure you die a horrible death. Thunder Palm. A middle-aged Taoist was bathed in blood. Lightning flashed around him and a terrifying thunderbolt struck out from his hand. Instantly, dozens of strange beasts were reduced to ashes. This Taoist was also rapidly aging because he had used up too much of his blood and qi. Amitabha. An old monk lamented the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind. He was reciting scriptures sorrowfully. The prayer beads in his hand were constantly being crushed and the Buddha's light around him suddenly increased. However, his body was constantly shriveling. When he looked at the blood souls in the sky, his eyes were filled with cold murderous intent. Evil creatures, have a taste of my Buddhist lion's roar. Roar. The old monk roared sorrowfully. A terrifying Buddha's light spewed out from his mouth and instantly turned a blood soul into black smoke. Bang! The old monk's qi of blood was used up and he finally turned into a dried corpse. There was no longer any sign of life. Master. Taoist. On the city walls, countless soldiers of Xia country were crying out in grief. However, the strange beasts below the city were surging violently. Even if two Taoist and Buddhist masters sacrificed themselves, they could not stop the attack of these strange beasts. Fatso Huang, don't you fucking die for me. Below the city walls, Gu Beichen wielded the blood-red saber in his hand as he slaughtered his way through a horde of beasts. Every time he swung his saber, a beast would die tragically on the spot. This young man was covered in blood as he roared at Fatty Huang in the distance. Little brat, take care of yourself. Your grandpa Huang will not die. Fatso Huang's face was sinister. Every time he swung out the poisonous dagger in his hand, a strange beast would die. However, Fatso Huang's cultivation was not as high as Gu Beichen's. Many wounds had already appeared on his body and blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth. Roar! A blood fiend with the body of a lion and the head of a leopard suddenly pushed Fatso Huang to the ground. It opened its bloody mouth and bit down on Fatso Huang's head. This made Fatso Huang close his eyes in despair, knowing that he was going to die tragically in the mouth of a blood fiend. Puchi. Suddenly, a flash of blade light tore through the air and the blood fiend was sliced into two. Gu Beichen flew over and helped Fatso Huang up from the ground. He even mocked him, "Damned Fatso, you're always teaching me some shameless tricks. But now that the blood fiend beast is attacking the city, your despicable and dirty tricks are useless. You still need me to save you." Although Gu Beichen was mocking him, his eyes were extremely serious. He violently swung the blood blade in his hand, continuously killing the strange beasts around him and protecting Fatso Huang behind him. Looking at Gu Beichen's actions of protecting him with his life, Fatso Huang was slightly stunned. A touch of emotion appeared in his eyes. He then laughed maniacally. "You little brat, now that you've grown up, you actually dare to mock your grandpa Huang. After we kill these strange beasts today, I'll teach you a lesson when we get back. Humph, as long as you don't die. Gu Beichen laughed out loud. The two of them fought side by side, barely resisting the attacks of the strange beasts. However, the numerous blood fiends in the sky had already fixed their eyes on them. They let out terrifying and eerie laughter and pounced on the two of them violently. Fatso Huang, hurry up and escape. When that bastard Yi Xian comes back, help me tell him that I, Gu Beichen, have cultivated because of him. However, he caused my sister's death. I will never forgive him in this lifetime. Gu Beichen roared loudly. He suddenly grabbed Fatso Huang's body and threw him towards the city wall. The blood blade in his hand emitted a terrifying blade aura as he crazily attacked the blood fiends in the sky. Beichen. Looking at this scene, Fatso Huang roared loudly. His body was trembling. Although Gu Beichen had broken through to the innate stage, he did not have any spells in his hands. How could he be a match for these terrifying blood fiends? Kill! The blood blade swept across the sky, killing all the blood fiends. Under Gu Beichen's crazed roar, his blade slashed through the bodies of several blood fiends. However, he did not cause any harm to them. Blood food, what a rich blood food, several blood fiends said hoarsely. They ignored Gu Beichen's blade aura and pounced on him violently. Sister! I'm coming for you. Gu Beichen's face bloomed with a smile of relief. His eyes were blurry. It was as if he could see Gu Xiaoxiao's smiling face. A look of relief appeared in his eyes. Rumble. All of a sudden. The wind and clouds changed and thunder boomed. A blood-red ray of light shot over from the distant sky. A terrifying blood sword shattered the void and instantly turned several blood fiends into ashes. Sir! Fatso Huang stood on the city wall. When he saw the figure that appeared in the void, his eyes were filled with tears of excitement. Yi Xian. Looking at the figure that appeared beside him, Gu Beichen muttered to himself. He was clearly in a daze. Brat, how dare you call me by my real name? Wait for your punishment when we return, Yi Xian said coldly. He grabbed Gu Beichen's collar and threw him towards Fatso Huang. All soldiers of the Great Xia Country's Army Division greet Mr. Yi. A large number of Great Xia Country's soldiers bowed. Their deafening voices shook the void. Jiangnan's Hanging Mirror Department welcomes Mr. Yi back to Jiangnan. Lu Jundai cried tears of joy. A large number of Jiangnan constables were cheering. At this moment, because of Yi Xian's appearance, the crowd that was struggling to resist the blood-soul exotic beasts let out an uplifting aura. This was because they knew that Mr. Yi was the top expert in the East. He had even defeated the beast tide. He was a godlike existence. Under the high sky, in the void. Yi Xian had his hands behind his back. He looked coldly at the blood-soul exotic beasts. A gust of wind blew, causing his black hair to flutter in the wind. His black clothes flapped and a terrifying blood-red light burst out from his body. Many of the blood-soul exotic beasts trembled and retreated. Die! His palm was like the sky, suppressing everything. Yi Xian raised his palm. It was as if he was holding up a mountain. The endless void rumbled. 1,000-foot bloody palm condensed in the sky and slammed down on the blood-soul exotic beasts. Boom! All things were annihilated, exterminating everything. The earth was shattered. The blood-soul exotic beasts howled in pain. But in the end, they were turned into ashes. The blood-soul essence that floated out was like a river of blood. It was directly swallowed by Yi Xian. Everything was silent. The world was silent. Originally, a calamity had vanished into thin air under Yi Xian's palm. When this scene appeared in front of everyone's eyes, it caused them to be stunned for a full 10 breaths of time before they gradually recovered from their shock. Victory, we won. I'm not dead yet. I'm still alive. Mr. Yi is mighty. All kinds of cheers came, proving how excited the people guarding Jiangnan City were. Chapter 177. Yi Xian's return ushered in a ray of hope for Jiangnan City. However, other cities were not so lucky. Countless human beings had been attacked and killed. Jiangnan City. Dilapidated and collapsed buildings, bumpy streets, and the ground was stained with blood from time to time. A large number of soldiers were cleaning up the mess and putting human beings who had died unjustly into body bags. Although the attack of the bloody beasts had ended, there were still these horrible things lurking in the city. When night fell, it was also the time when the citizens of Jiangnan City were frightened. Cries and sobs surrounded Yi Xian's ears. The corpses of adults and children, accompanied by the cries of their relatives, were all reflected in Yi Xian's eyes. They were muddle-headed and crying loudly. This was the worst era and the most miserable era. Human beings could not see hope. They did not know where the road ahead was. Perhaps when the sun rose the next day, they would become cold corpses and never exist in the world again. Yi Xian was walking forward. His face was gloomy, and he took in the dilapidated Jiangnan City. Until a ragged girl ran toward Yi Xian from both sides of the road. Fatso Huang and others were shocked and quickly stopped the girl. Are you the top master in the East? The girl was crying. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She looked at Yi Xian with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Let the child come here, Yi Xian said solemnly. The soldiers made way. The girl staggered until she came to Yi Xian. A pair of dirty little hands tightly grasped the corner of Yi Xian's clothes. She shook and said, Are you the top master in the East? Can you save my mother? Where is your mother? Yi Xian whispered. My mother is asleep. She has been asleep for a long time. She doesn't want Tong Tong anymore. The child giggled, and his voice was whispered and hoarse. Under the girl's crazy dragging, Yi Xian let the girl pull him toward a house. When Yi Xian entered the house, he saw a young woman with her eyes closed forever. Her body was lying on the wooden bed in the house. Mother, wake up. The girl knelt beside the woman and was calling for her mother in a daze. This also made Yi Xian's eyes shrink and he became silent. Child, your mother will never wake up. Yi Xian walked forward and said in a low voice. Uncle, you lied to me. Mother said she was just sleeping for a while. She said that when she woke up, Mr. Yi would come back and we would be saved. The girl's face was full of tears as she said in a daze. Mr. Yi, I'm really sorry to disturb you. This child is called Zhang Tong Tong. Yesterday, the blood soul beast attacked the city. A blood soul snuck in and killed her mother. Fortunately, a Taoist master intervened in time and saved the child's life. However, she witnessed her mother's tragic death with her own eyes. Because she couldn't take it, she was severely traumatized. Lu Jundi's face was full of sorrow as she came to Yi Xian's side and explained. Uncle, my mother said you are the top master in the East. Can you help Tong Tong wake her up? The little girl tightly grabbed onto the corner of Yi Xian's clothes and shook it. Her sorrowful and tender eyes were flowing with tears, causing Yi Xian to slowly close his eyes. It was unknown what he was thinking. Child, I can't save your mother. Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes and a trace of sadness flashed through his eyes. He suddenly turned and walked out the door. Mother. Mother lied. You said that when the top master of the East returns to Jiangnan, you will wake up. The girl's heart-wrenching cries came from behind Yi Xian. It made people's hearts feel like they were being stabbed by needles. Outside the house. Unknowingly, many figures appeared on both sides of the street. Their clothes were tattered and their eyes were lifeless. A sorrowful aura spread out from them. Plop! An old man, about 80 years old, walked shakily toward Yi Xian with the support of his granddaughter. When the old man arrived in front of Yi Xian, a line of clear tears flowed from his cloudy eyes. He slowly knelt before Yi Xian. "Mr. Yi, my children are dead, and I only have this granddaughter left. If this old man dies, then so be it, but my granddaughter is only 5 years old. This old man begs you, please save this world." The old man continuously kowtowed towards Yi Xian, and a large amount of blood flowed out from his forehead. "Mr. Yi." On both sides of the street, a large number of Jiangnan citizens knelt down. An extremely sorrowful atmosphere bloomed from everyone's body. They looked at Yi Xian with indescribable bitterness. The world was silent. Everything was silent. Yi Xian's eyes drifted. His gaze swept across everyone's face. All he saw was despair and sorrow. The smiles of the past no longer existed on their faces. "Everyone, please get up." Yi Xian helped the old man up. Then, he looked around at the Jiangnan citizens on the street. His voice was hoarse. "Yi Xian is not an ancient sage. I can't save the entire world. The only ones who can truly save themselves are yourselves." After Yi Xian finished speaking, he strolled into the distance. However, his hoarse voice slowly came from his mouth. "This is the best of times, but also the worst of times. We have nothing, but we stand tall and strong, Qingyun Villa." A waning moon hung in the sky. Yi Xian stood alone under the moon. His eyes were deep as he looked up at the starry sky. A gentle breeze blew, causing his black hair to flutter in the wind. "Sir, the world is collapsing. Blood soul beasts are wreaking havoc all over the world. There are also so-called gods running amok in the world. Humans are withering and the world is crying. Can you tell me why the underworld exists and where our path lies?" Fatso Huang's expression was bitter as he murmured. "Sir, although Fatty Huang isn't a good person, he's still a human, and humans have both good and evil sides. I implore you to save this world. If the human race withers, even if we're still alive under your protection, it'll be meaningless." Fatso Huang knelt on the ground. He had never had such a solemn expression on his face. This expression was pleading, hopeful, and also worried about the future of humanity. Unknowingly, Gu Beichen, Zhuo Junting, and the members of the underworld appeared behind Yi Xian one by one. They knelt down silently, their foreheads touching the ground tightly. The atmosphere in Qingyun Villa was filled with sorrow and heaviness. Yi Xian slowly turned around and looked at his subordinates behind him. A lonely smile appeared on his face. He said in a low voice, "Once, there was a person who told me that I must be kind as a human. However, in my opinion, this was just a joke. However, when I see the radiance of humanity on your faces today, I finally understand that that woman was not wrong. Even if a person has committed heinous crimes, there will always be a kind side deep in his heart." Chapter 178. Fatso Huang, you were originally a doctor. But because you found out that your wife was cheating on you, you killed her cruelly in a fit of rage. Gu Beichen, your sister was killed by the blood soul. The villagers of the river even used your sister to threaten me in order to survive. This showed you the evil nature of human nature. Zhuo Junting, your second uncle, killed your family cruelly. This unforeseen event turned you from a rich young lady into a vicious female Rakshasa. Every one of you has a story and your hands are stained with blood. But today, you are begging me for the future of mankind. Tell me, what made you do this? Is it really the kindness hidden in your hearts?" Yi Xian's eyes were deep as he looked at his subordinates. He wanted them to give him a real answer. "Human, sir, it's human." Fatso Huang said emotionally, when I saw that little girl crying crazily beside her mother's body, when I saw humans die tragically in the mouth of strange beasts, I realized that my heart was trembling. My heart was telling me that as a member of the human race, I can't sit back and watch my own kind die tragically. This is the difference between us humans and beasts. Good. All of a sudden, Yi Xian's eyes flashed with a terrifying blood-red light and a terrifying aura rose around him. He looked at the endless sky and said in a hoarse voice, "It's easy to overcome one's inner demons, but it's hard to escape one's heart. Fatso Huang, you have given me the answer I want. Let me give mankind the last hope before I become an immortal. As for whether mankind can survive this catastrophe in the future, it's all up to them." As Yi Xian's voice fell, Fatso Huang and the others were stunned. They looked at Yi Xian with eyes full of extreme horror. Become an immortal. It was a simple word, but it was as heavy as the stars and the universe. It was so oppressive that Fatso Huang and the others found it hard to breathe. All this time, Yi Xian had never told them about his cultivation. Fatso Huang and the others had always had a guess, but this guess had never been verified. However, Yi Xian's words today finally allowed them to understand what kind of terrifying existence the master standing in front of them was. Cultivator, an ancient and mysterious title. Fatso Huang and the others were absolutely certain that their master was a real cultivator. All of a sudden, Yi Xian soared into the sky, his entire body soaring into the clouds. His entire body was glowing. It was a kind of Tongtian light, and there was a kind of immortal charm surrounding him. Rumble. The sky shook, the void swayed, the wind howled, and the dark clouds in the sky broke apart. The waning moon in the sky sprinkled down endless moonlight, illuminating Yi Xian without a speck of dust, as if he was an immortal under the moon. I, Yi Xian, have cultivated for 4 years. I am known as the Immortal Sky Lord. Today, I will use the name of the Immortal Sky Lord to conquer the world. Those who have obtained my blood inheritance shall fight for the survival of mankind. They shall fight for the hope of mankind. The world rumbled. Yi Xian's vicissitudes of life spread between heaven and earth, which also made the bloody soul strange beasts hiding in Jiangnan city scream in fear. Qi! Qi! Like a group of falling stars, like a river of stars hanging upside down, blood-colored runes revolved around Yi Xian. These runes blossomed with an extreme blood-red light, and then suddenly shot out in all directions. Above the firmament were billions of stars, and above the starry sky was an indestructible guardian. When Yi Xian sprinkled the seeds of hope into the human world, whether or not humans could walk out of this catastrophe depended entirely on themselves. In the divine land of the great Xia, a rare blood-colored meteor shower streaked across the firmament, and blood-colored runes fell to the human world one after another. Outside the wilderness, a severely injured young man was about to die tragically in the mouth of a strange beast. However, as a blood-colored rune merged into his glabella, a terrifying blood-red light appeared around him and suddenly enveloped the bloody soul strange beast. The bloody soul strange beast howled in pain and turned into a large amount of blood qi that was swallowed by the young man. In the city, a young man with a broken limb was being bitten by a bloody soul strange beast. However, when a blood-colored rune merged into his body, his eyes blossomed with a terrifying light. He actually bit the bloody soul strange beast's throat with a ferocious smile. Miracles were happening all over the divine land. Every human who merged with a blood-colored rune had Yi Xian's voice in their mind. West, Moon God City. On the white bone throne, the so-called Moon God looked to the east. Through the purple-gold-black robe, her eyes were blooming with a deep blood-red light. A murmur came from her mouth. Yi Xian, you finally can't sit still. In a dark place, a pool of blood was churning violently. Tens of thousands of human corpses were screaming and wailing in the pool of blood. Their bodies were withering and turning into wisps of blood mist, which were being crazily devoured by a terrifying figure. Yi Xian, this world will be destroyed by us. Even you won't be able to escape. Heartbroken Mountain, Blood Sea Battlefield. The endless Blood Sea was turbulent, and the cries of the dead souls were endless. Above the Blood Sea, Yuan Ling's aura was gloomy. He seemed to be looking at Jiangnan City through the Blood Sea battlefield. His voice was cold and hoarse. Yi Xian, when these immortals and gods' remnant souls slaughter the world, when all humans are wailing, as one of them, I want to see how you will choose. Gu Xiao Xiao. Teacher. A slender figure walked out of the Blood Sea. Her face was pale, and her eyes were no longer clear. There was only a deathly stillness and a touch of blood. Go. Leave the Blood Sea battlefield. It's time for us to act. Yes, teacher. Dressed in a black dress and surrounded by blood, Gu Xiaoxiao strolled above the Blood Sea and gradually disappeared from Yuan Ling's sight. Yi Xian, our contest has just begun. Don't let me down. Yuan Ling murmured to himself, and a grim smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Jiangnan City. Since Yi Xian returned to Jiangnan City ushered in a long-lost peace. All the blood-soul exotic beasts lurking in the city fled. With Jiangnan City as the center, there were no blood-soul exotic beasts wreaking havoc within 1,000 miles. When the humans in the surrounding cities discovered this situation, they even rushed to Jiangnan City with their families. Obviously, Yi Xian's presence in Jiangnan City had turned the city into a pure land for humans. In the martial arts arena of Qingyun Lodge, Fatso Huang and the others sat cross-legged. As they breathed, a hazy blood qi circulated around them. In the end of the world, there is no spiritual qi. If you want to transcend the mortal world, you have to devour endless blood qi to nourish yourself. The blood-soul exotic beasts outside are the best tonic for humans. Yi Xian was preaching. Fatso Huang and the others were his people. Yi Xian would not treat them unfairly. Half a day passed. Fatso Huang and the others woke up from their cultivation. When they opened their eyes, a light of understanding flashed across their eyes. Everyone's face was full of excitement. Sir, is this the way of cultivation? Fatso Huang asked in a trembling voice. Chapter 179. Fatty Huang wasn't the only one who had this question, the others also had the same question. Everyone was very excited because the cultivation method had always been a legend. If one cultivated to the extreme, wouldn't they be able to live forever and become an immortal that could roam the 9 heavens? How could this not make them excited? Immortal cultivation methods are useless in this world. What I'm going to teach you is the method to refine blood qi. When you kill every strange beast and blood soul, you can devour the blood soul essence in their bodies until it becomes your own strength. But, you must be prepared. Even though this path can increase your cultivation quickly, it's easy to be corrupted by your inner demons. One wrong step and your soul will be destroyed. Yi Xian explained slowly, but there were some secrets he didn't tell Fatso Huang and the others. Although this method of devouring blood qi allowed one to cultivate quickly and was an alternative method of immortal cultivation, it was impossible to achieve immortal ascension with this method. This was because this method was too murderous and wasn't tolerated by the heavens. Even if someone could reach the tribulation passing realm, the only outcome was death. As for Yi Xian, he was a special case. He cultivated the undying immortal scripture and even grasped the taboo of the undying immortal scripture. Moreover, the heavenly punishing halberd had recognized him as its master. Of course, Yi Xian wasn't selfless enough to teach Fatso Huang and the others the immortal scripture. This had nothing to do with trust, because this was Yi Xian's trump card. He wouldn't reveal it even to his closest family members. Sir, Wuan Agency's Qing Long Tian Yu wishes to see you. A servant quickly walked over and bowed to Yi Xian. Tell them to wait for me in the guest hall. Yi Xian wasn't surprised at all by the arrival of Qing Long and the others. Clearly, the Wuhan agency was under unimaginable pressure during this calamity. In the guest hall, the two of them were anxiously waiting with faces full of worry. When Yi Xian's figure appeared in their line of sight, the two of them quickly stepped forward and bowed. "Greetings, Mr. Yi. No need for formalities. Just say what you want to say," Yi Xian said. "Mr. Yi, the Wuhan agency has suffered heavy casualties. They've all retreated to the capital. We can only guarantee the safety of the capital. We can't do anything to the other cities." Qing Long's face was red. "Mr. Yi, the entire country is fighting against these blood-soul beasts. Can you give us some pointers?" Tian Yu's eyes were filled with hope as he looked at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's expression didn't waver as he deeply looked at the two of them. He said in a low voice, "I'm just a single person, so I can't save the entire world. If humans want to walk out of this calamity, they'll have to rely on themselves. Furthermore, before I leave this world, I have already planted a seed of hope for humanity. It will eventually take root and sprout. Leave this world. Mr. Yi. Where are you going?" The two of them cried out in shock. It was obvious that they felt a sense of parting from Yi Xian's words. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't answer their questions. He looked deeply at the two of them and said in a low voice, "In 7 days, I will preach the Tao to the world at the peak of Mount Wu. All the powers of China can come here to listen to my teachings. What you need to do is to send out invitations and convey my will to the ancient martial arts families, Buddhism, and Taoism." "Mr. Yi, what are you going to do?" Qing Long asked in a trembling voice. He felt that Yi Xian was going to do something shocking. This world has fallen. Humans are struggling at death's door. Since that's the case, let me start the era of human evolution. This will be my last contribution to humanity. After Yi Xian finished speaking, he turned around and left the meeting room, causing the two of them to be in a daze. They looked at Yi Xian's back with even more confusion. A piece of news that shook the entire divine land of Xia came. Yi Xian, the top expert of the East, had never been defeated. He sent out invitations to all the major forces in Xia to Jiangnan. He would preach to the world at the peak of Mount Wu. The invitations were sent to all the major forces. They also sent their representatives to Jiangnan City. They wanted to see what the top expert of the East was going to do. The crowd was surging, and the streets were empty. 7 days wasn't a long time, but it wasn't short either. However, Jiangnan City was overcrowded. Mount Wu was a famous mountain in Xia. It was 500 kilometers away from Jiangnan City. It was also a tourist attraction. However, when the blood-soul beast wreaked havoc around the world, this famous mountain was deserted. However, Mount Wu was a little different today. It was a boiling cauldron of voices, one after another. A large number of people were rushing through the mountain, rushing towards the peak of Mount Wu. That was where the #1 expert of the East was going to preach to the world. At the peak of Mount Wu, Yi Xian was dressed in black. He stood quietly on the peak of the mountain. He looked at the vast sea of clouds. When he opened and closed his eyes, a terrifying bloody light flashed through them from time to time. Fatso Huang walked quickly to Yi Xian. He bowed and reported, "Sir, all the major forces have entered the venue. Do you want to go now?" "Okay." Yi Xian said softly and walked toward the venue. "Sir, are you sure you want to do this?" Looking at Yi Xian's back, Fatso Huang's expression was complicated. Even his voice was trembling. Before coming here, Yi Xian had issued an order to the underworld. This order was extremely cruel and bloody. It also made Fatso Huang ask Yi Xian in a trembling voice. "If they are willing to put aside their sectarian views and save the divine continent, I will not kill the innocent. However, if they are only doing it for their own selfish desires, then there is no need for them to exist." Yi Xian's voice was cold and emotionless. However, the killing intent that leaked out from his body made Fatso Huang's heart tremble. He then sighed and hoped that these forces could survive this disaster. At the peak of Mount Wu, it was extremely lively. Tens of thousands of people had appeared on the peak of the mountain. They were ancient warriors from various aristocratic families. Taoism's Mount Longhu, Buddhism's Lesser Lane Temple, Jixia College, and Monster Exterminating League. None of them were ordinary people. They all represented the transcendent forces of the Xia. I heard that Mr. Yi is going to preach here. I wonder if it's true. Ridiculous. You should know that Yi Xian is the top expert of the East. His cultivation method must be extremely powerful. Why would he teach it to us? This brother is right. There is no such selfless person in this world. Even if he is the top expert of the East, he is no exception. All sorts of discussions could be heard, causing the peak of Mount Wu to become noisy. Buzz. All of a sudden, the sound of something breaking through the air was heard. Yi Xian flew across the sky and appeared directly in the center of the venue. When he looked around at the major forces present, the noisy crowd gradually quieted down. Chapter 180. Mr. Yi, did you really summon us here to impart this technique to the world? A cultivator asked aloud. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not answer the cultivator's question. Instead, a large number of members of the underworld quickly entered the venue with books in their hands. They then handed the books in their hands to everyone. This is the blood qi devouring technique. Together with your own technique, you can devour the power of the blood soul exotic beasts to improve your own cultivation. Yi Xian's voice rang out in all directions, causing the expressions of the major forces present to change drastically. They quickly flipped through the books in their hands. After a few dozen breaths, the world gradually became deathly silent. Ha! All of a sudden, a maniacal laugh came from a cultivator's mouth, breaking the silence of the world. He clutched the book in his hand tightly, so excited that his body was trembling. Good, what a great blood qi devouring technique. With this technique, my cultivation will improve by leaps and bounds. Breaking through to the innate stage will be a piece of cake. Amitabha. Good, good. Benefactor Yi is so generous and selfless to impart such a heaven-defying technique to us. On behalf of all the monks of the Small Thunder Temple, Fahui, would like to express our gratitude to Benefactor Yi, an old monk said with a trembling voice, then put his palms together and bowed to Yi Xian. The heavens have not forsaken our Taoist lineage. The heavens have not forsaken our Taoist lineage. With this technique, perhaps we can revive the era of immortal cultivators. The blood-soul exotic beasts outside will be our best food. A Taoist with an immortal aura burst into tears. He clutched the book tightly in his hand as if he saw the hope of immortality. Cheers and wild laughter rang out incessantly. Every single person from the various forces present was extraordinary. They were all outstanding talents in their own forces. They could completely tell from this blood qi devouring technique that this was an extremely heaven-defying technique. Coupled with their own techniques, their cultivation would receive an extremely terrifying boost. Mr. Yi, your selflessness will forever be recorded in the annals of human history. Mr. Yi, you are the benefactor of our Taoist lineage. If our Taoist lineage returns to the golden age of cultivation in the future, we will never forget your kindness today. Amitabha, Benefactor Yi is truly a good person. My Buddhist lineage will forever remember Benefactor Ye's kindness today. Both the Buddhist and Taoist sects, as well as the ancient martial arts families, praised Yi Xian one after another. However, everyone had the intention to leave. Obviously, they wanted to start cultivating the blood qi devouring technique as soon as possible. Mr. Yi, we'll take our leave first. We'll definitely pay you a visit in the future. Thank you for teaching us today. Amitabha. I'll take my leave first. Whether it was the Taoists or the Buddhists, the various ancient martial families and adept organizations all bade farewell to Yi Xian. Everyone's faces were flushed red, but they didn't see the trace of coldness in Yi Xian's eyes. At this moment, a cold smile appeared at the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. His voice was strange and deep as he said, "I've already printed this blood-qi devouring technique and spread it all over the Xia. Any human can cultivate it." What? As Yi Xian's words fell, the major forces immediately cried out in surprise. They looked at Yi Xian with a look of extreme shock. "Mr. Yi, are you crazy? How can you teach this blood-qi devouring technique to ordinary people?" A Taoist expert cried out in surprise. Obviously, Yi Xian's method was simply too shocking. This Taoist expert was not the only one who had such thoughts. The other major forces also had the same thoughts. Everyone looked at Yi Xian with an unfriendly gaze. Whether it was the ancient martial ability users or the Buddhist and Taoist sects, they had always been above the mortals. If the mortals were to get their hands on this incantation, the forces they belonged to would suffer a great loss. This was also an outcome they did not wish to see. Ha! Looking at the pale faces of the major forces, Yi Xian seemed to have expected this outcome. This also made him sneer in disdain. "Today, I gathered all of you here to impart the technique is only one of the reasons. The real reason is actually very simple. That is, I hope that you, the transcendent forces, can contribute your cultivation techniques and print them all into books and spread them to all parts of the Xia so that every ordinary human can cultivate it." Silence, silence, a deathly silence. When Yi Xian said this, everyone present became silent. A violent emotion spread from the bottom of their hearts. They looked at Yi Xian with eyes of anger that had never been seen before. "Amitba. Benefactor Yi, you must be joking. How can the cultivation techniques of my temple that have been passed down for thousands of years be passed down to ordinary people? Mr. Yi, this is simply impossible. Our Longhu Mountain's cultivation techniques were created by our predecessors through blood, sweat, and tears. If everyone can cultivate our sect's cultivation techniques, then wouldn't there be no need for our Longhu Mountain to exist? This is absolutely impossible. Our Donghua clan's ancient martial arts have been passed down for thousands of years. Our martial arts techniques are passed down to our sons and not to our daughters. If our Donghua clan's cultivation techniques are printed and spread to the world, then wouldn't I become a sinner of the Donghua clan?" A large amount of indignant voices came from the mouths of the major forces. Clearly, they could not accept Yi Xian's actions, nor could they accept it. Ha! Yi Xian laughed. He really laughed. However, his laughter was extremely cruel. There was even a trace of blood in his eyes. When humanity is heading towards destruction, when the world has already collapsed, you are still selfish. And this is the greatest tragedy of humanity. Yi Xian's cold voice drifted in all directions. The sky gradually darkened, and blood-red lightning flashed in the clouds. An extremely terrifying murderous aura rippled between heaven and earth. Since you don't care about the life and death of humanity for your own selfish desires, then there is no need for forces like you to exist. Kill. It was as if the 9 heavens and the Milky Way were turbulent. Yi Xian's sword fingers streaked across the sky. High up in the sky, a 1,000-foot-long blood sword condensed. Rumble. The 1,000-foot-long blood sword fell to the mortal world. The sword qi that filled the sky poured down like a storm, instantly piercing through their bodies and turning the peak of Mount Wu into an Azura slaughterhouse. Blood. Fresh blood stained the ground. A large number of screams were heard. Everyone was scrambling to escape. However, when the 1,000-foot-long blood sword slashed down, they had nowhere to run. They could only scream and curse at Yi Xian. Then, they exploded into pieces and died tragically on the peak of Mount Wu. The screams became softer and softer. Corpses could be seen everywhere until the peak of Mount Wu became deathly silent. A large amount of blood stained the ground, and the world finally quieted down. Everything was silent. Heaven and earth were silent. Yi Xian stood on the peak of Mount Wu with his hands behind his back. He looked at the corpses of the various forces on the peak of Mount Wu. His face was expressionless, and a vicious look flashed across his eyes. Fatso Huang. Yes, sir. Pass down my order. Tell all members of the Wu and Bureau and the Mansion of the Dead to head to the sects of these forces. Print all their cultivation methods into books and distribute them to all parts of the Xia kingdom. If anyone dares to resist, kill them all. Yes, sir. Fatso Huang's face was pale. He quickly left to carry out the order. At this moment, Yi Xian ignored the countless corpses under his feet. He looked at the world in all directions. His eyes were deep and terrifying. He murmured in a cold voice, "Without destruction, there can be no construction. If humans want to walk the path of evolution, these so-called transcendental forces cannot be left alive." Chapter 181. An earth-shattering revolution was set off in China. An unfamiliar and terrifying name spread throughout the world. The underworld. These two simple words represented death and despair. Massacre, extermination, extermination. Wherever the underworld passed, be it ancient martial arts families or Taoist temples, they were all massacred. In today's world, blood-soul mutated beasts were wreaking havoc and humans were heading towards extinction. The underworld's actions were even more puzzling to the people. They cursed the underworld and even cursed the underworld's master, Yi Xian, day and night. That was until a shocking piece of news came that completely changed the way the people of the Xia country viewed the underworld. It turned out that the underworld's actions were to collect secret cultivation manuals from the various major factions. These secret cultivation manuals were all printed into books and distributed to the people of the Xia country. However, this was not the end. The blood aura devouring technique, a cultivation technique that could devour blood-soul mutated beasts, was also selflessly given to the people of the Xia country by Yi Xian. It truly gave them the ability to fight against the blood-soul mutated beasts. As for the various major factions, they refused to hand over the cultivation techniques in their sections. Naturally, they were subjected to a bloody massacre by the underworld. When this truth spread throughout the Xia country, countless people of the Xia country were in tears. They knelt and kowtowed as they chanted Yi Xian's name. Some people even set up longevity tablets for Yi Xian in their homes and burned incense and prayed day and night. Many so-called gods had appeared in this world. However, the people of the Xia country were skeptical from the beginning until Yi Xian opened up the path of human evolution. He truly allowed the people of the Xia country to see hope. In their hearts, Yi Xian was the only god and a true god. Unknowingly, a title that was unprecedented since ancient times had spread from the mouths of the people of the Xia country. The Divine King, Yi Xian. These four simple words carried the faith of the people of the Xia country. If there were too many so-called gods in this world, then Yi Xian was the king of the gods. He was the only one who was worthy of this title. 1 spread to 10, 10 spread to 100, 100 spread to 1,000, 1,000 spread to 10,000, vast and endless, millions of people sang his praises. When the words Godly King Yi Xian were spoken by the citizens of China, Yi Xian's reputation soared to the peak, attracting the attention of the world. Divine King Yi. Yi Xian's deeds were written into a biography. When his name was recorded in the annals of human history, even if tens of thousands of years had passed, future generations would never forget the Divine King's gift. On the 18th of the 8th lunar month, the Divine King's gift. This was the day that humanity began to evolve. It was also the day that the God King, Yi Xian, redeemed humanity. It would forever become a legal holiday for the people of this world. That day was also known as the Godly King creation by the later generations. Qingyun Villa, Jiangnan City. Yi Xian was leisurely flipping through an ancient book. His expression was calm and tranquil. From time to time, he would pick up a cup of tea and take a few sips, giving off a sense of leisure and contentment. Suddenly, Yi Xian frowned. A hint of surprise flickered in his eyes. This is, the power of faith. Yi Xian stood up in a daze. His originally calm face turned red, and he was completely stunned on the spot. Divine King Yi, please bless Xia with good weather and no longer be slaughtered by mutated beasts. Divine King, I, Li Zhigua, swear to you that I will fight the blood-soul mutated beasts to the end after learning your techniques today. I will have no regrets even if I die. Divine King, I don't have anything good in my house. Only these apples can be offered to you. Once the disaster is over, I will definitely ask my descendants to burn incense and worship you day and night. A large number of prayers kept ringing in Yi Xian's ears. These voices were the voices of the people, but they were also the voices of humanity. The endless power of faith gathered into a vast river, pouring into Yi Xian's primordial spirit at a terrifying speed. Buzz. The void buzzed and ripples spread out. Yi Xian's aura suddenly became chaotic. He did not dare to be negligent. He sat down cross-legged and kept circulating the immortal scripture. He turned the power of faith into wisps of cool air and integrated it into his primordial spirit. Half a day passed. Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. A beam of immortal light flashed in his eyes, and an extremely immortal aura surrounded him. This made Yi Xian clench his fists tightly. There was a faint hint of excitement in his eyes. The power of faith. It's the power of faith. I didn't expect the legend to be true. Yi Xian muttered to himself. The immortal light around him made him even more excited. What was the power of faith? The power of faith was an indescribable thing. A person's faith could be said to be insignificant. However, if the faith of hundreds of millions of people gathered together, it would be an extremely terrifying power. And this kind of power was extremely beneficial to immortal cultivators. Legend had it that if there was enough power of faith, even if there was no spiritual chi of heaven and earth, immortal cultivators could use the power of faith to transform into gods. They would possess extremely terrifying strength. However, although gods were powerful, they were two different concepts from immortals. When immortal cultivators used the power of faith to transform into gods, their cultivation would be completely provided by their believers. Their mortal body would also become a god's body. As the power of faith increased, their cultivation would also gradually deepen. The greatest advantage of gods was that they did not have heavenly tribulations and would not suffer from tribulations. As long as heaven and earth did not perish, gods would exist with the world. However, the heavenly Tao was fair. Although gods did not have to suffer from heavenly tribulations, they still shackled themselves. If there was a day when the power of faith was not supplied, gods would lose all their magic power and eventually disappear. Yi Xian deeply understood that he was too murderous. When he went through the 9 heavens immortal tribulations, he would definitely experience unimaginable tribulations. Perhaps he would fall in the 9 heavens immortal tribulations if he made a mistake. If he used the power of faith to transform into a god, it could be said that he could completely solve this problem. However, Yi Xian did not want to do so. Yi Xian was an extremely stubborn person. He believed in the principle that his fate was in his own hands and not in the hands of heaven. If he transformed into a god, he could only rely on the people's faith to live. This was definitely not the path he wanted to take. If there was a day when the people's faith in him did not exist, then wouldn't he fall between heaven and earth? Humans could only rely on themselves. Relying on external forces to obtain power was ultimately an illusion. Yi Xian was not misled by the power of faith and made a wrong decision. Although Yi Xian didn't intend to transform into a god, the power of faith wasn't useless. He continuously refined the power of faith into pure energy to nourish his primordial spirit, and even made his primordial spirit pure and flawless. Although there was less than 1/10 of the power of faith left after being refined, the energy in it became extremely pure. After his primordial spirit absorbed it, it would not affect Yi Xian at all. It also made his cultivation in the middle stage of crossing calamity faintly show signs of breaking through to the late stage. Chapter 182. Yi Xian had a vague premonition that although he did not use the power of faith to become a god, the people's faith in him would have an extremely powerful effect on his immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens. Become an immortal. I will definitely become an immortal in the mortal world. Yi Xian clenched his fists tightly. His eyes were extremely determined as he muttered to himself. Only by becoming an immortal would he be able to live forever. Only then could he truly take his first step until he ascended to the 9 heavens and sat on the throne of the celestial emperor. He would be worshipped by all immortals and all living beings. Sir! All of a sudden, Gu Beichen's body was covered in blood. He quickly entered the azure cloud pavilion, and even his voice was trembling slightly. Looking at this scene, Yi Xian snapped out of his thoughts and frowned. What happened? Sir, we encountered a powerful enemy. The 13 members of the underworld were all killed. Fatso Huang was also captured by the enemy. I fought my way out of the encirclement and was lucky enough to survive. Gu Beichen's face was flushed red, and even his voice was trembling. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth uncontrollably. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes, and a cold murderous intent flashed across his eyes. He threw a blood-red elixir directly to Gu Beichen, who quickly consumed it. The injuries in his body were gradually suppressed. Speak slowly. I want to know what happened. Yi Xian's expression was slightly sinister. Every member of the underworld that he built was the best of the best. Every loss of a member was a great loss to the underworld, not to mention the death of 13 core members of the underworld. Sir, according to your instructions, the members of the underworld were divided into 4 groups. As Gu Beichen spoke, Yi Xian's expression gradually became extremely cold. An extremely terrifying murderous intent bloomed around him, causing the temperature of the entire area to drop to freezing point. According to Yi Xian's instructions, the members of Underworld went to the various large factions and exterminated them, collecting a large number of cultivation manuals. In the early stages, some of the ancient martial arts aristocratic families were naturally not a match for Underworld. But when they stepped onto Little Thunderclap, they encountered a great enemy. Just 2 old monks were enough to severely injure Gu Beichen. Although Fatso Huang was full of tricks, he did not expect the Lesser Thunderclap Temple to be so powerful that he was captured by the other party. As for the 13 members of the Mansion of the Dead, they died tragically in the Lesser Thunderclap Temple. Bang! With a loud bang, Yi Xian turned the stone table in front of him into dust with a single palm strike. An extremely terrifying aura of viciousness circled around him. When he opened and closed his eyes, an extremely vicious light flickered within them. You dare to kill my men? If I don't grind your bones to dust, how can I relieve the hatred in my heart? Yi Xian said cruelly. He was clearly enraged. Junting. Your subordinate is here. Gather the members of Underworld in Jiangnan City and follow me to the Lesser Thunderclap Temple. If we don't kill all of these old bald donkeys, won't it show that Underworld is easy to bully? Yes, sir. The short conversation between the two made Gu Beichen hesitate. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. He said, Sir, Fatty Huang is in the hands of these bald donkeys. I'm afraid, if Fatso Huang is killed, I'll let them have a taste of what it means to live a life worse than death, Yi Xian said coldly. The Lesser Thunderclap Temple was located in the southwest. In the divine land of the Xia kingdom, it had stood tall for thousands of years. Legend had it that in the distant past, when the spiritual energy of heaven and earth still existed, the Lesser Thunderclap Temple had a Buddha in charge. His dharma spread throughout the world, causing the people of the world to revere the Lesser Thunderclap Temple. However, with the arrival of the end of the world, the Lesser Thunderclap Temple gradually faded away from the world of mortals. There was a saying that a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Even with the end of the world, the foundation of the Lesser Thunderclap Temple was not something that other forces could compare to. Flowers bloomed in the warm spring and the temple was peaceful. The sound of the evening drum and morning bell could be heard. The chanting of sutras could be heard in the temple, causing one to feel as if they had fallen into a pure land of Buddhism. Inside the temple, an old monk with a sorrowful expression who looked to be over 100 years old kept twirling the prayer beads in his hand. He was reciting a diamond sutra that had been passed down for a long time. Senior Brother Pudu, this Yi Xian's cultivation is terrifying. He even spread the blood qi devouring technique to the world. The mortals in the outside world call him Divine King Yi. If I'm not mistaken, he should have already stepped into the ranks of immortal cultivators. We killed his people and imprisoned his subordinates in the demon suppression tower. I'm afraid he won't let this go. An old monk in his 60s frowned. His face was filled with worry as he spoke in a sorrowful voice. Although we've obtained the blood qi devouring technique, we've only just started cultivating it. We're still far from reaching the golden elixir realm. If Divine King Yi comes knocking on our door, won't our Lesser Thunderclap Temple's thousands of years of heritage be destroyed? Another old monk said worriedly. Humph, Junior Brother Pudu, is he worthy of being called the Divine King? He's just a demon, the old monk Puhang roared angrily. That's right. This Yi Xian massacred all the major forces at the peak of Mount Wu. It's a demon's way of doing things. Moreover, according to the rumors in the outside world, this Yi Xian has massacred countless innocent lives. How can he be worthy of being called the Divine King? Another old monk said hatefully. Amitba, it's good, it's good. The Buddha beads in Pudu's hand stopped spinning. He slowly opened his eyes and stopped chanting. The sorrow on his face deepened. This Yi Xian has killed too many people. He wants to wipe out all the forces in the world and create an epoch of his own. Our Lesser Thunderclap Temple seeks salvation for all living beings in the world. Even if our temple is destroyed, we will never compromise with the demon, the old monk Pudu said sorrowfully. Senior brother, you have to think twice before you act. Our Lesser Thunderclap Temple is definitely not his match, the old monk Puji said with a trembling voice. Thud, thud, thud. Suddenly, a series of hurried footsteps came from afar. A young novice monk quickly walked in front of the old monks. His forehead was covered in cold sweat and his face was extremely pale. Grandmasters, bad news. That Divine King Yi is leading the underworld toward our Lesser Thunderclap Temple. The young novice monk cried out in fear. If one listened carefully, they would notice that his voice was trembling greatly. Amitba, it seems that it's time to show the power of our Lesser Thunderclap Temple. The old monk Pudu put his palms together and his voice was vast and mighty. Senior brother. Are you going to use the demon-subduing pestle? The old monk Puji asked with a trembling voice. Senior brother, you can't do that. The demon-subduing pestle is the treasure of our temple. The first patriarch left behind his last words. Unless the temple is destroyed, we must not use it. That's right. Why don't we return Divine King Yi's subordinates? At most, we'll give Divine King Yi the Buddhist secret scriptures as compensation. It won't be too late to kill the demon after we've mastered the blood qi devouring technique. Amitba. The old monk Pudu chanted the name of Buddha and said in a sorrowful voice, what's to come will come. Even if our Lesser Thunderclap Temple is willing to bow down to Divine King Yi, he's a murderer. How can he let us go? Chapter 183. As soon as Kitagarbha finished speaking, the other old monks present were stunned. Obviously, they knew that Yi Xian would never let the little thunderclap temple off just based on his style of doing things. Moreover, 13 members of the underworld had died in their hands. This was an unsolvable situation. Dong, dong, dong. 81 bells rang in the little thunderclap temple. A golden light shrouded the little thunderclap temple, and the sound of Buddhist chanting could be heard from all directions. On this day, the demon-subduing golden pestle finally appeared. All the monks of the little thunderclap temple were on standby, ready to welcome Yi Xian's arrival. They knew that this was a battle that concerned the survival of the little thunderclap temple. Strange beasts ran amok in the vast land. Floating corpses could be seen from time to time in the wilderness, being torn apart by strange beasts. The wind and sand filled the sky. Yi Xian's expression was unperturbed as he walked forward against the wind and sand. Behind him were dozens of members of the underworld. Their faces were filled with cold murderous intent. The strange beasts howled and fled pathetically. There was no need for Yi Xian to make a move. Just the murderous aura released by the members of the underworld was enough to make these strange beasts flee in all directions. Clearly, these strange beasts could also sense that this group of humans was not to be trifled with. "Sir, the little thunderclap temple is just 10 miles ahead. Should we kill our way there?" Gu Beichen asked in a low voice, unable to suppress the murderous aura in his eyes. "Ha!" Yi Xian's lips curled into a cruel sneer. He looked at the little thunderclap temple in the distance and said in a strange and cold voice, "Interesting. I didn't expect that the little thunderclap temple still has a spiritual weapon left in this world." Yi Xian took a step forward and suddenly disappeared from Gu Beichen and the other's sight. Gu Beichen's expression changed as he quickly called out to Jun Ting and the members of the underworld to speed up and rush towards the little thunderclap temple. Little thunderclap temple. The temple's doors were wide open. A large number of monks were holding sticks and waiting for battle. However, everyone's faces were slightly pale because they knew what kind of terrifying existence they were about to face. Woo woo woo. Yellow sand blew across the sky as a slender figure walked out of the sandstorm. His jet-black hair fluttered in the wind as his black ancient robes rustled. Although there was no aura around him, it was as if a towering mountain was pressing down on them. It made the monks feel as if they could not catch their breath. Tap, tap, tap. Yi Xian slowly walked over until he stood in front of the small thunderclap temple. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I have to say, your little thunderclap temple sure has guts for daring to kill someone from my underworld." Yi Xian's voice was calm, but it reverberated in the sandstorm. When he opened and closed his eyes, a sinister light flashed past, causing the monks guarding the entrance of the temple to unconsciously retreat. Amitabha, good indeed. A loud Buddhist chant was heard, causing the monks to stop retreating. They quietly tightened their grip on the sticks in their hands. Divine King Ye's fame is unparalleled. Today, you've graced our little thunderclap temple with your presence. Divine King Yi, please enter the temple for a chat. Old monk Pudu's sorrowful voice came from the temple, causing the monks guarding the entrance to make way for him. At that moment, Yi Xian smiled as he strolled into the little thunderclap temple. The monks on both sides lowered their eyes. It was obvious that Yi Xian's notoriety was too terrifying. Coming into contact with him at such a close distance made the monks tremble in fear. In the temple's courtyard, with Pudu in the lead, 4 old monks stood behind him. They were putting their palms together and muttering the demon-subduing scripture. The deafening Buddhist chant echoed in the void in all directions. Buzz! The void exploded and ripples spread. Yi Xian took a step forward. The ground under his feet cracked like a spider web, extending all the way to the feet of the old monks, causing their chanting to stop abruptly. Amitabha. Divine King Yi, as the saying goes, one should spare people wherever possible. Our little thunderclap temple has never offended you, yet you've been forcing us. Don't you think you've gone too far? Old monk Pudu said sorrowfully. His posture was neither servile nor overbearing, and his face bloomed with compassion. Ha! A sneer appeared at the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. He looked at old monk Pudu indifferently and said in a cold voice, "Old bald donkey, you dared to kill members of the underworld and imprison my subordinates. If you don't give me an explanation today, I'm afraid your temple, which has been passed down for thousands of years, will be destroyed." Old monk Puji took a step forward. His face was flushed red as he roared loudly, "It was your underworld who wanted to destroy our little thunderclap temple first. You even wanted to steal our secret cultivation scriptures. We had no choice but to kill you to protect ourselves. Yi Xian, don't go too far. Go too far." Yi Xian smiled. He really smiled, but it was a cruel smile. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked around at the old monks. His voice was malicious as he said, "You're right. I've gone too far, but what can you do about it? If I want to kill you, you'll have to obediently let me kill you. Those who dare to resist will be going against me, Yi Xian. As for the consequences of going against me, Yi Xian, I'll let you know what it means to wish you were dead." As Yi Xian's voice fell, the old monks' faces turned ashen. Their eyes were filled with rage as they looked at Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, you devil! Not only did you order your subordinates to destroy our little thunderclap temple, but you're also being so rude and unreasonable. You're even talking nonsense in our temple. Do you really think our little thunderclap temple is easy to bully?" Old monk Puji roared loudly. His body was overflowing with Buddha's light. It was obvious that he was extremely angry. "Ha!" Yi Xian laughed wildly. His eyes were malicious and cold as he said, "What a joke. You're really a joke. In this world, there's only the strong and the weak. Where does right and wrong come from? You don't even understand this. This so-called little thunderclap temple has been standing in the divine prefecture for thousands of years. Isn't that a joke? Remember, because I'm stronger than you, you're not even comparable to dogs in front of me. You can only be reduced to livestock. If I want to slaughter livestock, do I have to reason with livestock? What a sharp-tongued devil. Today, even if I die in your hands, I'll subdue the devil and kill you right here and now." Old monk Puhang roared loudly. He put his palms together and kept chanting sutras. His body was emitting a terrifying Buddha's light, causing his monk robe to flutter. He suddenly raised his Buddha's light hands and violently slapped toward Yi Xian. "You're just an ant. You don't know the power of heaven. Die!" Yi Xian said cruelly. When he took a step forward, the earth shook violently. The ground under his feet instantly collapsed, and he suddenly appeared in front of old monk Puhang. Without waiting for the old monk to make a move, Yi Xian smiled cruelly. His terrifying blood palm directly slapped the old monk's head. Bang! The Buddha's light was annihilated, and the old monk's body exploded. Old monk Puhang did not even have the chance to make a move. He was directly turned into a bloody mist and was killed by Yi Xian. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.